6 months after my wife died, my children called me a useless old man and tried to take control of my assets. I refused to sign. The next day, I used the $10 my wife left me to buy an abandoned gas station in the Nevada desert. My children mocked me and said I had lost my mind. But days later, hidden behind a crumbling wall, I found something my wife had secretly protected for decades. And the moment I saw what was inside, I realized I had just discovered something that could change the rest of my life forever. I'm grateful you're here listening. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me, have you ever had family turn against you when you needed them most? Your answer might help someone else feel less alone. A quick note. Some details in this story are fictionalized to highlight the message, but the lesson is what truly matters. My name is Arthur Calloway. I am 65 years old, and 6 months after I buried my wife, my children walked into my house carrying documents designed to bury me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started on an October morning in Elko, Nevada, 6 months after Eleanor passed. I sat alone in our living room, the one we'd shared for 40 years, tracing my fingers across a topographic map of Nevada's high desert region from the 1970s. My wife used to sit in the armchair by the window, still there, still empty, and we'd read USGS geological surveys together like other couples read novels. Eleanor had been 63 when her heart gave out in April, married 40 years. Both of us geological engineers, though she'd been the smarter one, the one who saw patterns in sediment layers that I needed 3 passes to notice. The map under my hands was old, creased at the folds, marked with elevations and fault lines that most people couldn't read. I kept my mind sharp this way, running my eyes over contour intervals and stratigraphic notations the way Eleanor taught me. It was the only thing that felt normal anymore. My phone vibrated on the coffee table, a text from Derek, my eldest son. 38 years old, wearing confidence like an expensive suit that barely hid the desperation of a man drowning in debt he thought I didn't know about. The message was short. Dad need a family meeting this weekend. Important. Don't forget. No greeting. No, how are you doing 6 months after Mom died? Just a demand curt and transactional, the way you'd summon a subordinate. I set the phone down and looked at Eleanor's empty chair. 3 weeks before she passed, when the hospice nurses had dimmed the lights and left us alone, Eleanor had gripped my hand with surprising strength. Her voice, usually so steady, had cracked when she whispered, "They will come for what's yours when I'm gone." I'd asked her what she meant. She'd just squeezed my hand tighter, looked at me with those sharp eyes that could read geological strata like sheet music, and said, "You'll know, and you'll remember I told you." Now, staring at Derek's text, I knew. Eleanor had warned me. I just didn't know yet how I would react. Saturday afternoon arrived 3 days later. I heard the cars pull into the driveway, Derek's black SUV, Desmond's Tesla, Kezia's modest sedan. The front door opened without a knock, because of course it did. This was an intervention, not a visit. Derek walked in, first his suit sharper than necessary. For a family meeting, every gesture calculated. Vivienne followed his 35-year-old wife, a commercial lawyer who'd never lost a case. She carried her leather briefcase like a weapon, documents already arranged with surgical precision. Desmond came next, my 35-year-old second son, wearing his architect's casual attire and the smirk of someone who thought age was a punchline. Kezia, my youngest at 28, entered last. She taught elementary school, had her mother's gentle nature, and couldn't meet my eyes. They settled around the dining room table. Eleanor's chair stayed empty. No one sat in it. Derek cleared his throat, leaned forward with manufactured concern. "Dad, we need to talk about your future." I waited. You're not young anymore," Desmond added, arms crossed. "Living alone at 65, managing finances, property, everything Mom used to handle. We want to help," Vivienne cut in smoothly, sliding a thick folder across the oak table toward me. "We've prepared some documents. Power of attorney, financial management arrangements. It's all standard. You just need to sign." I pulled the folder toward me, opened it, started reading. Voluntary transfer of financial power of attorney. Waiver of direct inheritance decision-making. Authorization for asset liquidation, pending health evaluation. What do you call it? When your own blood treats you like a burden to be managed, an asset to be liquidated, when the children you raise look at you and see only an obstacle between them and your bank account. I read every page, slowly. They watched me shifting in their seats, glancing at each other, with the impatience of people who thought this would take 10 minutes. Desmond broke first. "Dad, you're not young anymore. Let us handle it. You just need to sign." I turned another page. Vivian's voice hardened the lawyer, emerging from behind the daughter-in-law mask. We can proceed down the legal path if you refuse to cooperate. Competency evaluations, court proceedings. It's messier, more expensive, more embarrassing for everyone. I looked up from the documents, met Derek's eyes, then Vivian's, then Desmond's, finally Kezia's, though she flinched and looked away. Eleanor's voice echoed in my memory. They will come for what's yours when I'm gone. I set the folder down on the table, carefully, precisely, the way you'd set down a geological sample you didn't want to damage. And then, for the first time in 65 years of life, I chose not to say a single word. Not one. The silence stretched between us like a chasm that had been widening for 40 years, finally too wide to cross. Derek shifted in his chair. Vivian's confident mask slipped for just a second, confusion flickering across her face. Desmond uncrossed his arms, recrossed them, couldn't get comfortable. They had walked into my house expecting an old man to crumble under pressure, to sign away his dignity for the illusion of family peace. They had prepared speeches, veiled threats, legal contingencies. But they hadn't prepared for silence. I sat at the head of the table Eleanor and I had bought together in 1985, and I watched my children squirm. The folder sat between us, unopened, unsigned, a treaty that would never be ratified. Vivian tried again, voice sharp. Mr. Calloway. I didn't blink. Derek stood, paced to the window, came back. Dad, this is ridiculous. We're trying to help you. I looked at him with the same patient eyes I'd used for 40 years, reading the Earth's deepest secrets, studying sediment layers that took millions of years to form, understanding that some things couldn't be rushed and some truths couldn't be spoken, only witnessed. They had come to bury me, but I had been married to Eleanor Calloway for 40 years, and she had left me something they didn't know about yet, something worth exactly $10. I sat in complete silence, refusing to sign, and waited for them to understand that their father was done being underestimated. The silence held for another 10 minutes before I stood. Not to answer them, not to sign, just to stand. I walked past Derek through the kitchen, out the back door. I needed air. Maybe foolishly I thought I could find one thread of reconciliation with Desmond if we talked alone, away from Vivian's legal precision and Derek's desperation. The backyard stretched out in typical Nevada fashion, half-dead grass, giving way to desert scrub mountains visible under late afternoon sun. Desmond stood by the fence smoking. On the patio, his 8-year-old son, Finn, played with toy trucks, pushing a red dump truck through imaginary construction sites. The boy had Eleanor's eyes. I'd noticed that at the funeral. I walked toward Desmond, hands in my pockets, preparing words I hadn't quite formed yet. Something about family, about Eleanor. Oh, Dad. Desmond said, loud enough to carry across the yard, you should actually thank us. I stopped. He took a drag, exhaled, slowly made sure Finn could hear. You're just an outdated geological old man sitting around reading maps from 50 years ago. You don't understand anything about the world now. Technology, development, modern finance. Finn looked up from his trucks. We're trying to help you, Desmond continued, voice dripping with contempt that needed an audience. Sign the papers and live the rest of your years decently. Let people who actually understand the modern world handle the complicated stuff. The boy stared at me. 8 years old. Learning right now that his grandfather was something to pity. Something obsolete. A dinosaur. Desmond flicked ash onto the dead grass. 50-year-old maps? That's your life, Dad? 50-year-old maps that don't mean anything anymore. I looked at Finn, at his small hands holding the toy truck, at the confusion in his face as he tried to reconcile the grandfather he knew with the useless old man his father was describing. There is a particular kind of death that happens when your own son teaches your grandson that you are worthless. That age is something to mock rather than honor. It's not the death of the body. It's the death of legacy, of respect, of the simple dignity of having lived long enough to know things worth knowing. I turned around, walked back inside, didn't say a word to Desmond, didn't say goodbye to Finn. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a number I hadn't called in 6 months. Howard Brennan, the estate lawyer who'd handled Eleanor's will, answered on the third ring. He was a quiet man in his 60s who'd practiced law in Elko for 40 years without making a fuss about it. Arthur, his voice carried careful surprise. I have one question, I said. In Eleanor's will, that line about $10, what was that for? Silence. Then, can you come to my office tonight? There's something I need to show you in person. I drove to downtown Elko as the October sun set behind the Ruby Mountains. Howard's office occupied the second floor of an old brick building, small wood-paneled warm yellow light from a banker's lamp on a desk buried under folders and leather-bound law books. The room smelled like old paper and decades of filed documents. Howard wore reading glasses on a chain and a cardigan Eleanor had trusted completely. He opened a file cabinet, pulled out a folder with my name on it. The clause reads, he said, adjusting his glasses, $10 USD to be used to purchase property located at Route 93 mile marker 47 Elko County, Nevada, if Arthur Calloway chooses to exercise this option. I stared at him. Purchase what? He pulled a small sealed envelope from the folder. Eleanor's handwriting on the front, shaky but unmistakable, only open after you have signed the deed. He set it on the desk between us. Your wife came to see me 3 weeks before she passed, took a cab, couldn't drive anymore, sat in that chair you're in now and told me to prepare this clause. Paid $10 cash, had me notarize everything. She bought property with $10. She bought back property. Howard leaned back in his creaking chair. There's an abandoned gas station out on Route 93 mile marker 47. Been sitting empty for years. Owner wanted to get rid of it, sell for scrap value. Eleanor negotiated $10. If you want it, you pay the $10 she left. You sign the deed, and it's yours. I picked up the sealed envelope. Light, almost nothing inside. Just a few pages, maybe. A letter. Eleanor had left me breadcrumbs through a forest I didn't yet know I was lost in. She knew, I said quietly. Howard nodded. She knew something, Arthur. Wouldn't tell me what. Just said you'd understand when the time came. Said you'd know what to do with it. I turned the envelope over in my hands. 40 years of marriage. 40 years of reading geological surveys together, understanding sediment layers and fault lines, and the patient work of time transforming pressure into something solid. She'd always read people the way she read geology and layers and pressure. In what lay hidden beneath the surface, everyone else accepted at face value. And in the final weeks of her life dying in hospice, she'd seen this coming. The children, the documents, the humiliation. She'd left me an escape route, or a weapon, or both. I'll take it, I said. I'll sign. Howard slid the deed across the desk. I signed where he indicated, dated it, October 2022, and watched him notarize it with the same careful precision he'd probably used for 1,000 other documents. The envelope stayed sealed in my jacket pocket as I stood to leave. "Are you going out there?" Howard asked. "To see it?" "Tomorrow morning," I said, alone, without telling anyone. I drove home in full darkness, the sealed envelope pressing against my chest like a heartbeat. Eleanor had known exactly what was coming, had prepared for it in her final weeks, and had hidden something at an abandoned gas station in the Nevada desert that she trusted only me to understand. The next morning I would drive to Route 93, and everything would change. The next morning I drove out to Route 93 mile marker 47 alone without telling anyone. And what I found there looked like the last place on earth anyone would spend $10. The gas station sat 50 yards off the highway, accessible by a gravel access road that had mostly surrendered to desert scrub. A rusted sign hung crooked from a single bolt, Silas Gas EST, 1969. The pumps had been removed years ago, leaving concrete islands cracked by summer heat and winter freeze. The building itself was small, maybe 15 by 20 feet. Windows boarded with plywood, grayed by decades of sun. Red dust coated everything. Dry wind rattled a chain-link fence section that had come loose from its posts. To anyone else, this was abandoned trash, a liability, something you'd pay someone to haul away. But I wasn't anyone else. I'd spent 40 years working for the United States Geological Survey as a senior geological engineer. 40 years reading stratigraphic maps, analyzing sediment cores, identifying mineral deposits buried under thousands of feet of rock that looked identical to untrained eyes. Eleanor used to joke that I could walk across a parking lot and tell you what the Earth looked like 3 million years ago, 1,200 feet down. She wasn't entirely wrong. I stepped out of my truck, pulled my phone from my pocket, and started taking photographs. Not of the building, of the terrain, the slope of the land, the color variations and exposed rock outcroppings a quarter-mile west, the drainage pattern of an ancient creek bed, visible only as a slight depression running northwest to southeast. Then I opened Google Maps, switched to satellite view, and zoomed in. There. The gas station sat at the precise intersection of 3 stratigraphic layers I'd memorized in 1987, while working on a lithium survey for the U.S. GS Basin and Range Province Eastern Nevada sector, the Humboldt Formation running east-west, the Elko Basin sediments trending north-south, and beneath both, visible only in core samples and seismic surveys from the early 70s, a third-layer tertiary volcanic ash beds that trapped mineral-rich groundwater in pockets geologists called brine lenses. A geologist learns to see time written in stone, to read stories the earth tells in layers. Most people walk across without a second thought. I'd walked across 1,000 sites like this, recognizing what lay hidden beneath parking lots and wheat fields and abandoned gas stations that no one wanted. Eleanor had known I would see it. She'd known because she'd spent 50 years reading geological formations, the way other people read faces instinctively completely, without needing to be told what was hidden beneath the surface. We'd read those same USGS surveys together in the 80s. She'd marked pages, made notes in margins, asked questions I thought were theoretical exercises. They weren't theoretical. She'd been planning this. I stood in the wind and dust, staring at the worthless-looking property, and felt something shift inside me. Not grief anymore, not the hollow ache of her empty chair. Something else. Purpose. I drove home in silence. In my pocket was the deed bearing my name, Arthur Calloway, owner of 2.3 acres at Route 93 mile marker, 47, Elko County, Nevada. Purchased for $10 cash. In my head was the memory of stratigraphic maps I'd studied for 40 years, the intersection of 3 geological layers that told a story most people couldn't read. Eleanor's envelope remained sealed in my jacket pocket. But I was beginning to understand that she had seen this moment coming, had mapped my path forward when I couldn't see beyond her hospital bed. She'd known I would recognize what everyone else missed. She'd known I would understand. I parked in my driveway as the October sun set behind the mountains, pulled out the deed, and read the property description again. The gas station looked like abandoned trash to everyone else. To anyone who'd checked the county records, it was a nuisance the county wanted off the books. To my children, if they knew about it, it would be one more piece of evidence that their father had lost his mind spending money on worthless desert property. But through a geologist's eyes, I had seen something else entirely. I had seen the intersection of stratigraphic layers that told me this worthless patch of Nevada desert was sitting on top of something the earth had been hiding for millions of years. Something valuable enough that Eleanor had spent her final weeks making sure I would find it. I sat in my car, deed in hand, and realized her secrets were just beginning to reveal themselves. 4 days passed in silence. I drove to the gas station each morning with an old army green field notebook, the same kind I'd used during 40 years at the USGS, measuring terrain elevations and recording observations in handwriting only I could decipher. I told no one what I was doing. Not Derek, not Vivienne, not even Kezia, who'd called twice to check on me, and I'd let go to voicemail. On the 4th evening, I sat in my bedroom with Eleanor's photo on the nightstand, the same photo from our anniversary dinner in 2019, when she'd worn the blue dress she loved and smiled at the camera like she knew something I didn't. The phone rang at exactly 9 p.m. California area code, number I didn't recognize. I answered. "Mr. Calloway," a male voice, professional, deep. "We know you just signed the deed at Route 93 mile marker 47. Public record was updated this morning at the Elko County Recorder's office." Then he hung up. No questions, no threats, no introduction, just that statement delivered with the precision of someone reading from a database and the click of disconnection. I sat perfectly still, staring at my phone screen. The call had lasted 11 seconds. I wasn't worried. I was nodding the way you nod when a hypothesis gets confirmed by data. Someone out there, someone with resources, with systems sophisticated enough to monitor county property records in real time, was tracking my movements. They knew what I'd purchased, which meant they understood at least partially what that property was worth. How does a man know he's found something valuable when strangers with California area codes start calling before the ink on the deed has dried? I didn't tell anyone about that call, not even Estelle, who at the time I didn't know, would become one of the most important people in the coming months. The fact that someone was tracking county property records in real time told me everything I needed to know about the value of what I'd purchased for $10. Eleanor had known this would happen, had probably anticipated the California call, the surveillance, the invisible watchers circling like hawks over something they wanted but couldn't yet claim. She'd left me the deed, but she'd also left me the burden of being watched. The next morning I woke earlier than usual, loaded my field notebook and measuring equipment into the truck, and drove out to the gas station before dawn broke over the Ruby Mountains. The October air was cold enough to see my breath, the kind of high desert morning that reminds you Nevada is more than scorching summers. When I pulled into the gravel lot, I wasn't alone. An old pickup truck sat parked near the boarded-up building, beat-up Ford from the 90s dust-colored paint that matched the desert so well it looked like it had grown there. And standing beside it, holding a thermos, was my older sister, Estelle. Estelle Calloway was 67, 2 years older than me, widowed for the past decade after her husband died in a mining accident up near Battle Mountain. She lived about 2 miles down Route 93 in a small house she'd bought with the settlement, money kept to herself mostly, but had the kind of no-nonsense warmth I hadn't felt since Eleanor passed. We'd always been closer than I was with my own children, which said something about blood that I didn't like to examine too carefully. "Morning," she said, walking over with the thermos. "I've seen you drive out here every morning this week. Thought you might need coffee." I took the thermos, still warm. "You've been watching me?" "Hard not to notice when your brother drives past your house at 6 a.m. 5 days running." She smiled slightly. "You want to tell me what possessed you to buy this wreck? Stocks." We sat on the concrete steps of the gas station, the same steps that hadn't felt weight in probably 20 years, drinking coffee from the thermos cap, while the sun climbed over the eastern mountains and painted the valley gold. "I knew Silas," Estelle said, staring out at the desert. "The old man who owned this place. Strange guy, kept to himself mostly. Died back in the 90s. People around here said he was hoarding junk, collecting scrap metal and old equipment, like he was building something no one could see." I sipped the coffee, strong, the way Eleanor used to make it. "But I always wondered," Estelle continued, her voice quiet against the wind, "if he wasn't hoarding, if he was protecting something. He'd sit out here for hours just staring at the ground like he could see through it, like he was guarding treasure nobody else knew about." She looked at me. "Is that what you're doing? Guarding something?" I thought about the California call, the sealed envelope in my jacket pocket, the stratigraphic layers I'd recognized that first day, the way Eleanor had known exactly which property exactly, which price exactly when I would need it. "I'm finishing what my wife left undone," I said. Estelle nodded once, didn't ask what that meant, didn't press for details, just poured more coffee into the cap and handed it back to me. "That you need help," she said. "You know where I live." 6 months of grief and isolation can make you forget what simple kindness feels like until someone shows up with coffee and asks for nothing in return. She stood, brushed dust off her jeans, walked back to her truck, started the engine, waved once through the windshield, and drove back down Route 93 toward her house, leaving a dust trail that hung in the still morning air. I sat on those concrete steps, her thermos still warm in my hands, and understood something Eleanor had probably known all along. I couldn't do this alone. The California watchers were circling. My children thought I'd lost my mind. The property beneath me was valuable enough that strangers monitored county filing systems, waiting for someone like me to make a move. But I had Estelle now, my sister. Someone who'd known Silas, who understood the desert, who could show up with coffee and not demand explanations. Eleanor's sealed envelope remained unopened in my jacket pocket, pressing against my ribs with each breath. But the pieces of her plan were beginning to reveal themselves in ways I couldn't have predicted. The mysterious California call, Estelle's stories about Silas protecting something, the gas station sitting at the intersection of 3 stratigraphic layers that held secrets millions of years old. I finished the coffee, closed the thermos, and looked out at the valley stretching endlessly toward mountains I'd studied on geological surveys for 4 decades. Somewhere out there people were watching, and I was just getting started. 2 days after I signed the deed, I sat alone in the gas station as desert wind rattled the broken windows and finally broke the seal on the envelope Eleanor had written in the last weeks of her life. The interior was cold, despite it being October, the kind of high desert cold that seeps through cracked walls and broken door frames. I'd brought a folding chair from my truck and a flashlight, the heavy mag light I'd carried during field surveys for 3 decades. Evening light filtered through boarded windows and narrow slashes, painting the dust-covered concrete floor in gold and shadow. I held the envelope in my weathered hands. Eleanor's handwriting on the front, shakier than I remembered from before. The illness took her strength. "Only open after you have signed the deed." I broke the seal. Inside, a single sheet of notebook paper folded once. Her handwriting barely legible. the words tilting and wandering like a drunk man's walk written in the final days, when holding a pen required effort she could barely spare. My dearest Arthur, I know you will find out. Silas was my father's friend. He told Father about the map before he passed. Father told me when I was a child. You are the only geological engineer I trust. Look at the west wall of the back shed. You will understand. Love you always, Eleanor. I read it 3 times. Silas was her father's friend. Her father had known about something hidden here, had told Eleanor when she was a girl, and she'd carried that secret, 40 years. 50 waiting for the exact moment she would need to give it to her husband, the geologist. She'd orchestrated this entire inheritance. Not in her final weeks, not even in the months after her diagnosis. She'd been planning this since before we married, maybe. Choosing me not just as her husband, but as the one person with the training to understand whatever Silas had protected in this abandoned gas station. I sat silently for a long time, eyes red, but I didn't cry. Eleanor was the first one to set the trap, the first one to see what was coming. She'd known our children would turn on me, known I would need something more powerful than money or lawyers or family bonds that had already fractured beyond repair. 40 years of marriage, and I thought I knew every secret she kept, every childhood story she'd told. But Eleanor had been carrying Silas's map in her memory since she was a girl, waiting for the exact moment her geological engineer husband would need it most. I stood up, took the flashlight, walked straight to the back shed without hesitating another second. The shed sat behind the main building, a small concrete structure, maybe 3 meters square, the kind of utility room gas stations used for storing equipment and supplies. The door hung crooked on rusted hinges, secured by a padlock so corroded it looked like it had been there since 1969. I pulled a wrench from my tool bag and broke the lock in 3 hits. Inside, it was pitch black. The flashlight beam cut through darkness thick with dust and decades of abandonment. The smell hit me immediately, old motor oil soaked into concrete, crumbling cement powder, the particular mustiness of a space that hadn't felt moving air since before I retired from the USGS. I shined the light on the west wall. Cracked concrete, water damage from 50 years of desert temperature swings. But there, about chest height, a section where the cracks formed a rectangular pattern too precise to be natural weathering. I pulled a small hammer from my bag and tapped the concrete. Hollow. I broke through carefully concrete so brittle it crumbled like chalk under gentle pressure. Dust filled my lungs. I coughed, kept working, pulled away chunks of cement until I exposed a narrow cavity in the wall. A moisture-proof metal compartment, maybe 15 centimeters deep, wrapped in plastic sheeting that had yellowed with age. Inside the compartment, a cylindrical tube, military green, 10 centimeters in diameter, 60 centimeters long. Metal caps on both ends sealed with wax and rubber gaskets designed to keep moisture out for decades. I recognized it immediately. USGS map storage tube, standard issue from the 1960s through the late 1980s. I'd used hundreds of these during my career, carrying stratigraphic surveys and geological core samples and mineral assessment maps across Nevada, Colorado, Wyoming, every state in the basin and range province where the federal government wanted to know what was buried under empty desert. This tube had been sealed for at least 30 years, maybe 50 hidden in a wall by a man named Silas, who'd trusted Eleanor's father enough to tell him about it before he died. And Eleanor's father had trusted his daughter enough to tell her about it when she was just a girl. A geologist learns to read time in layers of stone, but Eleanor had read the future in layers of family betrayal, mapping out my salvation in the same careful detail I once mapped underground formations. I lifted the tube from the compartment. Heavier than I expected. Something substantial inside rolled tight against the inner walls. My hands shook as I broke the preservation seal. Not from the cold, though the desert night had dropped to near freezing. Not from age, though I was 65, and my fingers didn't grip like they used to. From the weight of holding something Eleanor had known about since childhood. Something she'd trusted only me to find and understand. Something that connected her final act of love to secrets buried in Nevada geology for half a century. I stood in that freezing shed dust, floating in my flashlight beam like ghosts of the past, and understood with absolute certainty that Eleanor hadn't just left me a property deed. She'd left me a weapon. She'd married a geologist specifically equipped to decode whatever maps this tube contained. She had orchestrated my inheritance of this exact location with the precision of someone who understood that geology wasn't just about reading the Earth's past, but predicting its value to the future. Tomorrow, I would open the tube and see what 50-year-old government surveys revealed about the ground beneath my feet. Tonight, I stood alone in the dark, holding Eleanor's final gift, understanding that she'd seen this moment coming decades before our children walked into my house with power of attorney documents. She'd known, she'd always known, and she'd loved me enough to make sure that when the time came, I wouldn't face them empty-handed. I carried the tube outside the shed, where the air was clearer, where I could breathe without choking on 50 years of concrete dust. Spread an old tarp across the ground, used broken bricks to hold down the corners against the Nevada wind that never stopped howling through the desert at night. My hands were steady now. The trembling had passed. What came next was the kind of calm you feel when you've made a decision that can't be unmade. I broke the seal on the tube, pulled out the rolled map inside, and spread it across the concrete floor of that abandoned shed. The red pencil markings covering the valley showed 2 letters that would either save me or destroy me, Lee. The map was large format, the kind of detailed stratigraphic survey that required teams of geologists working for months to compile. Stamped across the top in faded red ink, classified internal use only 1971. Extensive red pencil markings covered the valley region, handwritten notations in the margins, depth calculations, mineral composition estimates. I recognized it immediately. This was the preliminary stratigraphic survey from the 1971 Federal Mineral Exploration Program, part of Richard Nixon's initiative to identify domestic mineral resources during the Cold War. The program had been suspended in 1973 due to budget cuts. Most of the surveys were archived in paper form, never digitized, never released to the public. And there, covering the valley beneath and surrounding the gas station, dark red markings with clear notation, Leigh-bearing brine deposit, estimated depth 180 to 220 meters, further survey required. Lithium-bearing brine. Lithium? I closed my eyes, opened them. The map was still there. Not a dream. Eleanor's childhood secret had just revealed a deposit potentially worth billions beneath the property I'd purchased for $10. The Earth had been hiding lithium in that desert brine for millions of years, waiting patiently while humans fought over the worthless surface, never knowing the real treasure lay buried in geological time beneath their feet. I needed confirmation, professional confirmation from someone I could trust completely. I rolled the map carefully, secured it back in the tube, and drove home. Locked the original in my bedroom safe, made a high-resolution scan, and printed a copy. The next morning, before dawn broke over the Ruby Mountains, I called Griffin Donovan. Griffin was 42 years old, manager of GeoNevada LLC, the most reputable geological consulting firm in Elko County. More importantly, he'd been my best student during my USGS teaching days, back when I still believed in passing knowledge to the next generation. I'd last seen him at Eleanor's funeral, standing in the back row, the only person there who understood what losing her meant beyond the empty condolences everyone else offered. He answered on the second ring. Professor Calloway. I hadn't been called professor in 15 years. I need to see you, this morning, your office. It's about a geological survey. I'll be there in 20 minutes. GeoNevada's office sat in a modern building downtown, all glass and steel that looked out of place in old Elko. Inside, computer screens displayed geological analysis software. I barely recognized core samples, lined shelves, and climate-controlled cases, the tools of modern geology that made my field notebooks look like relics. Griffin met me in his office, closed the door, pulled the blinds. He knew me well enough to recognize when something serious was happening. The classification stamp was 50 years old. Federal geological surveys declassify automatically after 4 decades under the Federal Records Act, making this a public document that had simply been sitting inside a private wall. I spread the copied map across his desk. His face went pale. He leaned closer, studied the markings, the depth notations, the classification stamp. This is from the 1971 federal program. I've heard about these surveys, but never actually seen one. They were never made public. Yet read the notation, I said. Tell me what it means with modern survey technology. He traced his finger over the red markings. Leigh-bearing brine deposit, estimated depth 180 to 220 meters. If this survey is accurate, he looked up at me. With modern survey technology, a lithium deposit in that region, at that depth, we're talking grade A lithium carbonate. Enormous commercial value. Professor, where did you get this? That doesn't matter. What matters is this: I need you to keep this absolutely secret. And if anyone hires your firm to survey the land around Route 93 mile marker 47, you report it to me immediately. Griffin stared at me. Understanding dawned slowly across his face. You own that property. I do. And someone else wants it. My children want it. They just don't know why yet. There's a particular trust that exists between a teacher and his best student, a bond forged not in blood, but in shared understanding of truths that most people will never see or comprehend. Griffin and I had spent 3 field seasons together, mapping fault lines in the Basin and Range Province. He'd learned to read geology the way I did not, as static rock formations, but as stories written in time pressure and invisible chemical compositions that told you what lay hidden beneath the surface everyone else could see. He nodded slowly. If anyone contacts GeoNevada about that area, you'll know within the hour. What are you planning to do with this information? He asked. I rolled up the map. Wait, he looked at me for a long moment, then nodded again. A geologist who'd worked in the field for 20 years understood that timing was as important as location. You didn't drill for oil before the market was ready. You didn't announce mineral discoveries before you controlled the land rights. You didn't move until every piece was in position. Eleanor had positioned the pieces 40 years in advance. I drove back to the gas station with Griffin's confirmation burning in my mind, like the lithium deposit burning 200 meters beneath the desert floor. Eleanor had known about this map since childhood, had married a geologist. Specifically equipped to understand, it had orchestrated my purchase of the exact property, and had left me with geological proof of billions in hidden wealth. Now, all I needed to do was wait for my children to make the first move to reveal their plans for the valley, and then I would show them that the old geological engineer they had dismissed as worthless understood the Earth's secrets better than any of them could imagine. I parked at the gas station, walked to the edge of the property, and looked out at the valley stretching endlessly toward the mountains. Somewhere beneath my feet, locked in brine pockets that had formed millions of years ago, lay enough lithium to power electric car batteries for half of America. And my children thought I'd bought a trash heap for $10. The irony was almost geological in its perfection. 2 weeks passed. I spent them at the gas station measuring recording, working in silence while Griffin's confirmation of the lithium deposit burned in my mind like a secret I couldn't share. And across town, my children were also meeting. I didn't know this until Kezia called late that night. While I'd been taking measurements of the valley terrain, calculating depths, and cross-referencing Eleanor's 1971 map with modern geological databases, Derek had called a family meeting in his downtown Elko office. Not at my house this time, not where I could overhear or interrupt. Just the 3 siblings and Vivian sitting around Derek's conference table with architectural renderings and LLC formation documents spread across polished wood. Kezia told me everything, her voice shaking, words tumbling out in guilty confession. Derek had unveiled his vision, Elko Desert Oasis, a luxury glamping resort targeting wealthy California clients who wanted authentic Nevada desert experiences without actually roughing it. High-end canvas tents with real beds and climate control, farm-to-table restaurant using local ingredients, guided geological tours of the basin formations, spa services, the whole manufactured authenticity package that sold for $500 a night to people who thought staying in a tent made them adventurers. The location, the valley surrounding my gas station. The old man sits in that trashy gas station all day, Derek had said, according to Kezia's tearful recounting. Can't do anything. Let him have fun with his pile of trash. We buy the surrounding land, build the resort around it. He'll never even know. Vivian had come prepared. LLC formation documents already drafted. Land acquisition paperwork ready to file. She'd researched the property ownership in the valley, mostly absentee landlords and the county holding tax-delinquent parcels. Easy purchases, she'd assured them. Minimal resistance. Desmond had brought architectural concept designs, renderings of canvas structures nestled into desert landscape, tasteful lighting, stone pathways, the kind of development that looked natural in photographs but required millions in infrastructure no one would see. They'd needed capital, still needed my signature on those power of attorney documents to access the assets they claimed were being mismanaged. But Derek was confident. The resort would make them wealthy, would prove to everyone, especially their incompetent father, that they understood modern business better than the old geological engineer sitting in his worthless gas station reading 50-year-old maps. What do you call it? When your own children plan an empire on land, you control dismissing you as irrelevant trash while you sit on proof of billions they can't see or imagine. Eleanor would have called it perfect. Kezia had been pressured to sign. Minority shareholder in the LLC, 10% stake. Derek had framed it as family unity, as making sure she wasn't left out when her brothers became successful. Vivienne had slid the papers across the table with her lawyer's smile that didn't reach her eyes. And Kezia had signed. But then she'd come to my apartment that night, stood outside in the October cold, and called me at 11 p.m. from her car because she couldn't live with the guilt. They needed more capital, she whispered into the phone. Still need you to sign those asset papers. But Derek was confident the resort would make everyone wealthy. He kept saying you'd never even notice. I sat in the small gas station office looking out at black desert under a sky full of stars that had witnessed 1 billion years of geological transformation. My phone pressed against my ear, my youngest daughter crying on the other end of the line. "You did the right thing calling me," I said, my voice steady, calm. The voice of a father who'd spent 40 years teaching young geologists that panic solved nothing, that observation and patience revealed truths that haste concealed. "Now do one thing," I continued. "Sign whatever they require, and don't tell anyone about this call." Silence on the other end. Then in a whisper so quiet I almost missed it. "Father has a plan, right?" I didn't answer. Couldn't tell her yes without revealing too much. Couldn't tell her no without breaking whatever fragile trust had driven her to betray her siblings. The hardest part of strategic patience is watching someone you love get caught in the machinery of justice you're building, knowing you can't save them without destroying everything Eleanor planned. "Just trust me," I said finally, "and keep yourself safe." I hung up, sat still for a moment in the dark office, Eleanor's map tube visible in the corner where I'd propped it against the wall like a talisman. The 1971 survey showing billions in lithium. Griffin's confirmation that the deposit was real. And now Derek's resort plans laid out with the arrogant confidence of someone who thought his father too senile to matter. The clock had started running. I needed to act faster than I'd anticipated. I picked up the phone again and dialed a number I'd found 3 days earlier after Griffin's confirmation had made Eleanor's plan crystallize into something actionable. Howard handled wills and estate law. What I needed now fell into entirely different legal territory. He'd said as much himself when I called and recommended the man whose name I'd found in my own USGS contacts 3 days earlier. Raymond Cole, mineral rights attorney, 30 years practicing in Elko, specialized in subsurface property law that most people didn't even know existed. He answered on the fourth ring voice, groggy. "This is Cole." "Mr. Cole, my name is Arthur Calloway. I need legal counsel regarding mineral rights acquisition in Elko County. Specifically, I need to know how to purchase subsurface rights to approximately 800 acres of valley land before anyone else files development permits." Silence on the other end, then. "That's specific and unusual. Can this wait until morning?" "No," I said. "It can't. My children are planning to build a resort on land I intend to control from the bedrock up, and they're planning to start filing permits within the month." Another pause. Then Raymond Cole's voice came back sharper, more awake. "Meet me at my office tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Bring whatever documentation you have about the property in question." "I'll be there," I said. I hung up and looked out at the desert darkness. Derek thought he was building an empire on land his senile father would never notice. Vivienne thought her legal expertise had covered every angle. Desmond thought his architectural vision would transform worthless desert into profitable luxury. None of them knew that their father owned the mineral rights to the gas station property. None of them understood that Nevada law allowed those rights to be severed from surface ownership. None of them had read the 1971 USGS survey showing what lay buried beneath the valley they wanted to develop. And none of them suspected that in 7 hours I would walk into Raymond Cole's office and begin building the legal trap that would transform their resort dreams into the mechanism of their own destruction. Eleanor's plan was entering its final phase, and I was ready. Raymond Cole's office was on the second floor of an old brick building in central Elko. The sign outside reading Cole and Associates Mining and Mineral Law. I'd known his name from my USGS days, but never thought I'd need him to weaponize geology against my own blood. I arrived at 7 a.m., carrying Eleanor's 1971 classified stratigraphic map, Griffin's written geological confirmation, and notes from Kezia's call detailing Derek's resort conspiracy. Raymond looked up from his desk. 55 years old, sharp eyes behind reading glasses, 3 decades mastering Nevada's mineral rights statutes. Mining law books lined the walls, a small Nevada flag on his desk. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "show me what you have." I spread the map across his desk, explained the 1971 survey, showed Griffin's confirmation, described Derek's Elko Desert Oasis plans. Raymond studied the documents for 10 minutes, then leaned back. According to Nevada Revised Statutes, Chapter 517, he said, mineral rights in Nevada can be severed from surface rights. You can separately purchase the mineral rights to the entire valley, including whatever land your children are buying. If they dig into the ground without owning those mineral rights, they violate Nevada's subsurface mineral estate statutes, civil and criminal penalties. Meaning their resort becomes an illegal mining operation the moment they break ground deep enough to hit mineral-bearing strata, which according to this map is everywhere in that valley, at depths their foundation will reach. He tapped the survey. But you need to act before they file for foundation permits. You need to own the subsurface before they own the surface. How long? Weeks, maybe less. Raymond asked me a question I'd waited 40 years to answer. "Mr. Calloway, do you want to stop them, or do you want to destroy them?" I looked at Eleanor's map, thought of her death, my children's power of attorney ambush, Desmond calling me a dinosaur, Derek dismissing my gas station as trash. "Destroy them," I said. Raymond nodded and opened his laptop. "Then let's get to work. Geology teaches you to think in layers separated by millions of years. Law teaches you to think in clauses separated by numbered pages. And when the two converge, you can bury your enemies under weight they never saw coming." For the next 3 days, we worked with campaign intensity, every morning at his office. Every evening I returned to the gas station and studied Eleanor's map. First, Raymond established Desert Geological Holdings, LLC, in my name, used his office address to avoid detection, filed with Nevada Secretary of State, legal and invisible. Second, we purchased the mineral rights. Elko County had classified the 800 acres of valley as barren desert land, with no mineral value since the 1980s. The county offered mineral rights at nominal consideration, $3 per acre. 800 acres times $3, $2,400. The same amount Eleanor had left me to buy the gas station, like she'd known exactly what everything would cost. I paid from my private savings account, separate from any joint assets. Raymond filed the mineral rights deed with the county recorder, listing Desert Geological Holdings, LLC, as owner of all subsurface rights from bedrock to 500 feet depth. Legal under NRS 517. Recorded in public records my children would never check. Invisible until I chose to reveal it. Third, Raymond drafted the loan agreement. $150,000 I would offer Derek to capitalize the resort. Generous terms, low interest, 10-year payback, an offer that would make him think I'd accepted defeat. But buried in page 47 was a conversion clause. Raymond drafted it with surgical precision. 14-point bold font larger than the rest of the contract. Red border box surrounding the clause. A separate signature line beneath, "I have read, understood, and agreed to." Section 47 independently. This eliminates any possibility of a court dismissing the clause as hidden or unconscionable. Raymond explained. When Vivian signs this, and she will, because she won't believe your loan agreement could outmaneuver her, she'll be legally acknowledging she read and understood the conversion terms. The clause was elegant. If Derek's company violated my separately held mineral rights, the loan would immediately convert to equity ownership. Controlling equity. Enough to seize the resort, the LLC, everything. Eleanor had mapped my path with geological precision, and now Raymond was translating that ancient stone language into modern legal code that would bind my children tighter than any family obligation ever could. On the fourth morning, I sat in Raymond's office holding 2 documents. The The first Elko County mineral rights deed showing Desert Geological Holdings, LLC, controlled every atom beneath the valley floor, 800 acres, $2,400, filed and recorded. The second, the loan agreement, $150,000 of apparent generosity containing page 47's red-bordered landmine waiting for Vivian's signature. The legal trap was set. The geological weapon was loaded. Now, I just needed to make one phone call that would sound like a father's forgiveness, but deliver my children into the mechanism of their own destruction. I pulled out my phone and looked at Derek's number. Raymond watched me. "You ready?" I thought of Eleanor's empty chair, her final instructions, the map she'd kept secret since childhood. "I've been ready since the day they walked into my house with those documents," I said. I dialed Derek's number. He answered on the third ring. "Dad, Derek," I said, voice carefully neutral. "I've been thinking about the family, about helping where I can. I'd like to take you to dinner this weekend. There's something I want to discuss that might help with your plans." Silence. Then, "What kind of help?" "The financial kind," I said. "I know you need capital. I have savings. I'd like to help." Another pause. I could hear the calculation in his silence. "Saturday night?" he asked. "Saturday works," as I said. I hung up and set the phone down. The trap was baited. Derek would come, expecting a defeated old man offering money out of desperation. He'd bring Vivian to review the contract. They'd see generous terms, standard clauses. And Vivian, the commercial lawyer, would sign page 47 without reading it, underestimating a contract drafted by the old man she'd dismissed as incompetent. Eleanor's revenge was entering its final phase. That weekend, Derek called and invited me to dinner, his voice carrying the forced warmth of someone who needed something. And it was the first time my children had invited me anywhere since we buried Eleanor 6 months earlier. I arrived at the restaurant wearing the shirt Eleanor had loved, the blue one she'd bought me for our anniversary, carrying Raymond's loan agreement in a manila folder that felt heavier than paper should. Derek and Desmond sat waiting, dressed like they were closing a business deal instead of meeting their father, which I suppose they were. "Dad." Derek stood, shook my hand with practiced firmness. "Thanks for coming." "If family should eat together," I said, sitting across from them. Vivian arrived 10 minutes later, leather briefcase in hand, the lawyer who never went anywhere without being prepared to read documents. We ordered, made small talk about weather and traffic that fooled nobody. Then Derek leaned forward. "Dad, we wanted to talk to you about the resort project. We're making real progress, but capitalization is tight. We thought since you offered to help." I slid the folder across the table. $150,000, 10-year term, low interest. I want to see you succeed. Derek's eyes widened. Desmond actually smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from either of them in months. That's generous," Derek said carefully. Vivian pulled the folder toward her, opened it with professional efficiency. Started reading. I watched her scan the 47-page contract, watched her eyes move across clauses and subclauses with the speed of someone who'd reviewed 1,000 similar documents. She flipped to the appendix, found page 47, and I saw her pause. The red-bordered box, the 14-point bold font, the separate signature line, reading I have read, understood, and agreed to. Section 47 independently. She signed without reading the actual clause, just like Raymond had predicted. She thought it was standard lender protection language for elderly borrowers, boilerplate to protect a confused old man from being taken advantage of, the kind of clause she'd seen in dozens of family loan agreements. She had no idea it was the landmine that would detonate her family's future. "Everything looks standard," Vivian said, sliding the signed contract back to me. "Fair terms. We appreciate this, Arthur. How do you measure the distance between a lawyer's confidence and a lawyer's catastrophic mistake?" 47 pages and one unread clause. Derek put his arm around my shoulder as we left the restaurant. "Thanks, Dad. You really understand us." I nodded, thinking of Eleanor, thinking of page 47, thinking of the conversion clause Vivian had just armed with her own expert signature. The next evening at exactly 9 p.m., I sat in my renovated gas station office with coffee cooling on the desk when my phone rang. California area code, the same one from before. I answered. "Mr. Calloway." A different voice this time, older, more authoritative. "I represent Novateur Energy's acquisitions department. We're an EV conglomerate based in San Jose, looking for domestic lithium sources. We've been tracking public mineral rights filings at the Elko County Recorder's Office. Your recent purchase caught our attention. I said nothing. Let the silence stretch. We'd like to schedule a face-to-face meeting as soon as possible, he continued. Discuss acquisition terms for the subsurface rights you filed last week. We have a November 30th board deadline for Q4 approvals, so timing is critical. I'm not ready, I said calmly. When I'm ready, I will call you. I hung up before he could respond. They had a November 30th deadline. I knew the timing now, and I controlled it. Not them, not my children, me. A major corporation was circling my lithium deposit with billion-dollar hunger, and my children were completely unaware that their resort sat directly in the kill zone. 1 week later, I drove out to the Valley worksite. Surveying equipment dotted the landscape orange stakes marking property boundaries. Derek's off-road vehicles parked where he and Desmond were directing a crew setting up preliminary measurements. Desmond saw me first, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Dad, what are you doing here? This is a construction site, dangerous for old people." The crew looked up. Young men in hard hats who didn't know family dynamics, just knew the boss's brother was being dismissed. My old geological father here, Desmond continued gesturing at me like I was a museum exhibit. Spent his life reading maps from 50 years ago, now out here watching us work for real. The crew laughed politely, the kind of laughter employees give when the boss makes a joke that isn't funny, but requires acknowledgement. I looked down at the exact spot where they had marked the foundation corners, bright orange spray paint on desert soil. Right there, 180 meters beneath their feet, lay the lithium deposit Eleanor's 1971 map had marked in red pencil, and Griffin's modern analysis had validated to the meter. They were digging their own graves while mocking the gravedigger, standing on billions of dollars in lithium while calling me worthless for knowing it was there. I smiled faintly, turned around, walked back to my truck, drove home in silence, and called Griffin. "They're about to file for the foundation permit," I said. "Let me know the moment they hire a geological survey team." "Everything falling into place?" Griffin asked. "Exactly as Eleanor planned," I said. I hung up and sat in my truck, watching the desert sun set behind the mountains. Vivian had signed the conversion clause. Novatur was ready to pay billions for the lithium rights. Derek would soon file for foundation permits that would trigger the mineral theft trap the moment they broke ground. Griffin would alert me when my children hired his firm for geological surveys that would confirm they were building a resort on top of my deposit. Desmond's mocking laughter still echoed across the valley, but it didn't matter. Eleanor had orchestrated this from her deathbed with geological precision. Every layer, every clause, every perfectly calculated humiliation that would transform into legal devastation. And my children had no idea how fast the ground was about to shift beneath their feet. 3 weeks passed. Everything I'd set in motion continued to fall into place with the patient inevitability of geological sediment compressing under its own weight. Then Griffin called. Tuesday morning, early November. The call came as I sat at my kitchen table with coffee watching frost patterns dissolve on the window where Nevada sun hit cold glass. "Mr. Calloway." Griffin said, his voice carrying that careful neutrality of someone delivering news that could be either good or catastrophic. "Your son just hired my firm." I set down my coffee. Derek, he contacted Geo Nevada yesterday afternoon. Wants a preliminary environmental survey of the 800-acre parcel, the one you own the mineral rights to. He cited Nevada Administrative Code, Chapter 519. A environmental assessment required before commercial mineral development. Said he's filing for construction permits next month and needs this done first. How long does he want it completed? 5 days, statutory deadline for preliminary surveys. I thought about Derek hiring Griffin's firm. Thought about my son thinking he was being clever, getting professional intelligence on his father's foolish investment before moving forward with the resort. He had no idea Griffin was reporting every word of this conversation directly to me. "Do the survey correctly," I said. "Professional, by the book, but Griffin don't mention lithium." "Preliminary surveys don't go deep enough anyway," Griffin said. "We test surface contamination, shallow soil composition, water table issues. The lithium deposit is 300 feet down. We won't see it." "Good. Perform the work. Report to Derek as his client. But anything you find, anything he asks, anything unusual, you tell me immediately." "Understood." I hung up and stared at my coffee. Derek was playing checkers, moving pieces forward one square at a time, thinking he was being clever. But Eleanor had taught me chess where pawns can become queens if they survive long enough to cross the board. How many moves ahead had she seen when she whispered those coordinates in the hospice room? How many of my children's strategies had she already anticipated and countered from beyond the grave? 2 days later, Thursday afternoon, Vivienne arrived at my house. Alone, no Derek, no Desmond. Just her and a leather portfolio that I'd learned meant legal documents designed to corner me. She sat across from me at the dining table without being invited. "Arthur," she said, pulling papers from the portfolio with practiced efficiency, "we need to discuss your recent financial decisions." I waited. The $2,400 purchase of worthless mineral rights. The $150,000 loan to Desmond with questionable terms. These represent a pattern of erratic decision-making that concerns the family. She slid a document across the table. "This is a consulting agreement. It grants me limited financial power of attorney for 2 years. You'll retain ownership of assets, but major financial decisions, anything over $10,000, require my co-signature. It's for your own protection. And if I refuse..." Vivienne's face hardened into the expression I'd seen her use in negotiations. The corporate lawyer who'd never lost a case. "Then I file for a competency evaluation under Nevada guardianship law. Your recent unusual financial behavior provides sufficient evidence for a judge to order psychiatric assessment. It's not what anyone wants, Arthur, but the family needs to protect you from yourself." I let her finish. Let her think the threat had landed. Then I stood, walked to my desk, and pulled a document from the drawer where I had kept it waiting for exactly this moment. Notarized. Official. Bearing the letterhead of Dr. Sarah Mitchell, licensed psychiatrist. Mini mental state examination. I said, setting it in front of Vivienne. Administered 3 weeks after our family meeting in August. Score 30 out of 30. Perfect cognitive function. Vivienne stared at the paper. "I took this test," I continued, "the day after you first mentioned protecting family assets during that meeting. I anticipated exactly this move. Raymond has the original. Copies have been filed with my physician and the county clerk's office." I sat back down. "Your competency threat is legally dead before you file it. No judge in Nevada will order an evaluation when I have documented perfect cognitive function from 3 months ago. Try it if you want. Waste the filing fees." Vivienne's hands tightened on her portfolio. "The consulting agreement," I said, gesturing to her papers. "Take it with you." She stood without a word, walked to the door, stopped with her hand on the knob. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "I'm making very calculated decisions. You just don't understand the calculations yet." She left. I watched her car disappear down the gravel driveway, her leather portfolio clutched in white-knuckled hands visible through the window. The MMSE document sat on my table, a single sheet of paper that had just destroyed a corporate lawyer's carefully constructed legal attack. The November wind rattled the window frames, and I thought of Eleanor again. She'd always said, "Preparation isn't paranoia when you know your enemies." At the time, I'd thought she meant business competitors, mining companies that wanted our USGS research, developers who tried to buy land before surveys were published. Now I understood she'd meant family. That night, long after Vivienne's failed attempt to seize control of my finances, I opened my email and found a new message. Sender Mitchell and Associates Law Firm, Reno, Nevada. Subject line, Notice of Intent, Mineral Rights Dispute. Not from Vivienne this time, a litigation specialist. Derek had escalated beyond family pressure into actual legal warfare. I opened it. The letter claimed my purchase of the mineral rights constituted fraud, alleged that the county seller had failed to disclose material information about subsurface value, making the transaction voidable under Nevada contract law. Demanded I provide all documentation related to my knowledge of mineral deposits at the time of purchase. Discovery. They wanted discovery. I stared at the screen, my coffee long cold beside the keyboard. The trap was elegant. If Derek forced a legal battle over the mineral rights' legitimacy, discovery would require me to reveal exactly what I knew about the lithium deposits and when I'd known it. I'd have to defend the purchase by proving I'd bought it fairly, which meant admitting I'd understood its true value from Eleanor's 1971 map before the transaction. Or I could stay silent, let Derek potentially void the entire purchase, lose the subsurface rights that controlled everything. Defend the property and reveal the lithium early, or protect the secret and risk losing the weapon. Eleanor's chess game had just entered the endgame, and I wasn't sure which piece I was supposed to sacrifice next. Derek's litigation threat sat in my inbox like a ticking clock, but I didn't open my email again that night. Didn't call Raymond, didn't prepare a legal defense. Instead, I drove to Estelle's house without calling first headlights cutting through Nevada dark at 9 p.m. on a Friday. She answered the door in her robe, reading glasses still on, book in hand. Looked at me, standing on her porch, and didn't ask questions. Just stepped aside and let me in. We sat on her back porch under November stars, the kind of cold, clear night where you could see the Milky Way stretched across the desert sky like sediment layers in stone. "I need to tell someone," I said, "before this goes any further." Estelle poured tea from a thermos she'd brought outside. Waited. "Eleanor left me a map," I said. "From 1971. Classified USGS survey showing lithium deposits beneath the valley. Grade A lithium carbonate 180 to 220 meters deep. Worth billions." She knew about it since she was a child. Her father knew Silas, the man who owned the gas station. She married a geologist who could understand what the map meant. She planned this for decades. I explained the mineral rights purchase, the LLC, the loan with its conversion clause. Derek's resort plans built on land I controlled from bedrock up. "The 800 acres they are developing," I said, "every atom beneath the surface belongs to me, and they have no idea." Estelle listened without interrupting. The way Eleanor used to listen when I came home from fieldwork needing to talk through geological puzzles I couldn't solve alone. When I finished, she set down her tea. "Eleanor knew exactly what she was doing, Arthur. She trusted you." She reached across the small table and placed her hand lightly on mine. The first time anyone had touched me with simple kindness since Eleanor's funeral. The first moment in 6 months I didn't feel completely alone. "Are you afraid?" Estelle asked quietly. I thought about Derek's litigation threat, Vivian's competency attack, the Novaterre billions circling, everything falling into place exactly as Eleanor had planned. "Only of one thing," I said, "and it has nothing to do with Derek or Vivian." Estelle squeezed my hand once and let go. Didn't ask what I meant. Understood that some fears couldn't be spoken aloud. I drove home from Estelle's watching desert stars through my windshield. Eleanor used to say revenge was geology, not wildfire. Slow pressure, invisible accumulation over time, then sudden transformation when the right fracture point arrived. She'd been teaching me patience my whole marriage. I just hadn't understood what I was learning it for. Monday morning, 7:43 a.m. My phone buzzed with an email notification. Elko County Recorder's Office. Subject construction permit approved. Elko Desert Oasis Development. I read it twice. Derek had his permit. The resort could proceed. Foundation excavation authorized to begin within 30 days. I called Raymond. "Everything's in place," he confirmed. "Mineral rights registered under Desert Geological Holdings, LLC. Conversion clause notarized in Vivian's signature. The moment they dig into mineral-bearing strata without owning subsurface rights, they violate Nevada mineral estate statutes and trigger the loan conversion. And Derek's fraud litigation, Jurstersperst, and Wettismangsforresting. Ignore it," Raymond said flatly. "He's threatening discovery to find out what you knew about lithium deposits when you purchased the rights. But in 3 weeks when you close the Novaterre deal, the entire fraud claim becomes irrelevant. You'll have documented fair market value for the lithium rights from a third-party buyer. No judge will void a transaction that a billion-dollar corporation independently validated." I hung up and stared at the construction permit email, then called the number that had been sitting in my phone for weeks. The California area code, Novaterre Energy Solutions. A woman answered. Professional, efficient, corporate development officer handling lithium acquisition negotiations. "Mr. Calloway," she said, recognizing my name immediately. "We've been hoping you'd call." "I'm ready to discuss acquisition terms," I said. 3 weeks from now, face to face." "We have a November 30th deadline for board approval this quarter," she replied. "Timing is tight. 3 weeks is enough," I said. I hung up and walked to the gas station window. Looked out at the valley where Derek's surveying equipment still marked foundation corners with bright orange paint. Standing at the gas station counter, I thought of stratigraphic layers. My children saw the surface-cheap desert land, a foolish old man reading obsolete maps, a gas station worth exactly what I'd paid for it. While 300 feet below their foundation, stakes $2.3 billion waited in silence like lithium, locked in brine, patient and inevitable. Derek thought he was fighting a legal battle over fraud, thought discovery would expose his senile father's confusion about mineral values. He had no idea I wasn't defending anything. I was counting down. 3 weeks until Novatur. 2 weeks until Derek's litigation deadline. And when that deadline passed, when Novatur's corporate lawyers verified every geological survey and paid fair market value for lithium rights, Derek didn't know existed, his fraud claim would evaporate like desert rain before it hit the ground. I wasn't playing defense. I was letting time do the work Eleanor had designed it to do. I looked down at the gas station floor, cracked linoleum over concrete, over 300 feet of sediment over the richest lithium deposit in Nevada. 3 weeks until Novatur. 2 weeks until Derek's litigation deadline. I thought of Estelle's question on her porch under those November stars. Are you afraid? The answer was simpler than she knew. I was afraid of winning, afraid of what it would mean to execute Eleanor's plan perfectly, afraid of standing over my children's destroyed dreams and knowing I'd done exactly what she'd mapped out for me to do. But fear didn't stop geological processes, didn't halt the slow compression of sediment into stone, didn't prevent lithium from crystallizing in brine over millions of years. And it wouldn't stop me from finishing what Eleanor started. The excavator's diesel engine shattered the desert silence at 6:47 a.m., 5 days after the permit arrived. I stood beside Estelle at the chain-link fence Derek had installed overnight, watching the orange Caterpillar 336 tear into Nevada hardpan like it was punishing the earth for existing. The operator, a man in a reflective vest who didn't know he was digging my family's grave or my fortune, dropped the bucket with hydraulic precision, then lifted 12 cubic yards of rock and caliche in a single scoop. They're moving fast, Estelle said quietly. I nodded, calculating. The Elko Desert Oasis development plan called for a foundation excavation 300 feet deep to anchor the thermal retention system for the underground spa complex. At this rate, assuming 8-hour shifts and standard desert excavation speeds accounting for bedrock density, they'd hit the lithium-bearing clay layer in 72 hours. 3 days until Derek discovered what he'd stolen. Desmond arrived in his black Audi at 7:15, parking near the construction trailer with the vanity plate that still made my jaw tighten. Callaway. He stepped out wearing a hard hat that looked like a costume surveying his kingdom, with the expression of a man who'd finally proven his older brother was the family failure. Quite a sight, isn't it? He called across the fence, grinning. This time next year, that'll be a 5-star resort. Guests paying $400 a night to sleep on land you thought was worthless. I said nothing. Eleanor had taught me that silence was the most devastating response to men who needed validation. Derek emerged from a white pickup truck blueprint tube under his arm, moving with the aggressive confidence of a developer who'd secured financing and permits in record time. He joined Desmond near the excavator, both of them pointing at the ground like generals planning a conquest. They had no idea the ground beneath their feet was worth more than every resort in Nevada combined. Arthur, Estelle touched my arm. When it happens when they find it, what will you do? I watched the excavator's bucket swing in another arc. Wait for them to tell me. That afternoon, Raymond Cole called while I was restocking antifreeze at the gas station. We have a problem, he said, and my chest tightened despite knowing the plan was airtight. Vivian's appraisers found Desert Geological Holdings, LLC. I set down the jug carefully. How much do they know? They know the LLC exists. They know it was registered in October, shortly after Eleanor's estate was fully settled. They know you're the registered agent. Raymond paused. They don't know what it owns. Explain. Mineral rights don't automatically show up in standard title searches. You have to specifically request subsurface estate records from the county recorder. Vivian's team found the LLC name in some cross-referenced filing, but they can't trace the asset value because the mineral deed was recorded separately under Nevada Revised Statutes, Chapter 517, which allows confidential beneficial ownership for mineral estates under 10 acres. I exhaled slowly. Eleanor had structured it perfectly. The mineral rights purchase I'd made in May had been recorded as a separate transaction, invisible to anyone searching only the surface property deed. Novatur did the same verification last week, Raymond continued. Their due diligence team confirmed clean title on the surface estate. They're satisfied. But here's the critical part. Once excavation hits the lithium layer, you have a 24-hour window before discovery becomes public record through the Nevada Division of Minerals. What happens in 24 hours? When Derek's excavation crew finds lithium, they're legally required to report it to NDOM within 1 business day. Once NDOM logs it, the discovery becomes part of the Public Mineral Survey database. At that point, anyone, including Vivien's appraisers, can search the coordinates and see there's a commercially significant deposit. They still won't know you own the subsurface rights, but they'll know the surface property just became exponentially more valuable. I understood. And they'll sue to stop any transaction. Correct. Vivien will claim you defrauded the estate by concealing material information. The lawsuit won't succeed. You didn't conceal anything, you just didn't volunteer information they didn't ask for. But it'll freeze the Novateur deal in litigation for 18 months. The excavator's diesel rumble filtered through the phone line from the construction site half a mile away. 72 hours until discovery. 24 hours after that until public record. So I have 96 hours totals, I said. From the moment they hit lithium, yes. You need to close the Novateur deal before NDOM logs the discovery. Raymond's voice carried the precise urgency of a lawyer, stating facts, not opinions. I've already drafted the purchase agreement. Novateur's acquisition team is scheduled to meet you in 3 weeks. But if we move the timeline up, no. I watched a customer pull up to pump a woman in a Subaru who had no idea the man pumping her gas owned $2.3 billion worth of lithium. We stay on schedule. 3 weeks. Arthur, if the excavation... 3 weeks, I repeated. Eleanor's plan accounted for this. Raymond went quiet then. You're betting they hit lithium exactly when you need them to. I wasn't betting. I was counting on geology on the stratigraphic intersection I'd identified in 1971, on the mathematical certainty that 300 feet of excavation through tertiary claystone would expose the lithium-bearing formation at a predictable depth. Eleanor had trusted the rocks. So did I. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Eleanor's 1971 survey map spread before me, recalculating excavation speed against Novateur's meeting schedule. The numbers aligned with a precision that felt less like luck and more like Eleanor's ghost orchestrating every variable from beyond the grave. 72 hours until discovery. 21 days until Novateur. I'd spent 6 months watching Derek and Desmond celebrate stealing my inheritance. Now, I was calculating whether they'd dig fast enough to destroy themselves on schedule, and whether I'd have time to profit from their greed before Vivien's lawyers caught up to the truth. Derek's text arrived at 11 a.m., lunch today. Want to update you on progress. My treat. I stared at the message while restocking motor oil at the gas station, recognizing the tone-cordial surface condescension underneath. Derek never offered to treat unless he wanted something. And he'd never called construction work progress when speaking to me before. I texted back, noon Miguel's. The restaurant sat 2 blocks from the courthouse, a place where Derek liked to be seen conducting business. He arrived 5 minutes late in pressed khakis and a polo shirt, with the Elko Desert Oasis logo embroidered on the chest, branding for a resort that didn't exist yet, standing on land worth more than he could calculate. Dad, he shook my hand with the firm grip of a man proving something. Thanks for making time. We sat near the window. Derek ordered without looking at the menu, then pulled out his phone and swiped through photos of the excavation site like a father showing off his children. 300 feet deep already, he said, pride thick in his voice. Ahead of schedule, the thermal retention system will be revolutionary, guests sleeping underground in climate-controlled luxury geothermal, heating the whole 9 yards. I nodded watching him perform, which brings me to why I wanted to talk. Derek set down his phone and leaned forward with the expression of a man making a generous offer. The gas station. I know you're attached to it, but realistically, Dad, it's an eyesore next to a 5-star resort. Kills the aesthetic. I see. So I want to make you an offer. $50,000. He paused, waiting for my reaction. That's 5,000 times what you paid. I checked the county records, $10. I'm being generous. The irony landed with perfect clarity. Derek thought $50,000 proved his business sophistication, his modern understanding of value. He was offering 0.03% of the property's actual worth, $2.3 billion in lithium carbonate lying 300 feet beneath his thermal retention system, and calling himself generous. I took a sip of water. Why isn't 50,000 enough? Derek blinked, recalibrating. We can negotiate because I'm not selling. His face flushed red, the color rising from his collar to his temples. He stood abruptly, chair-scraping tile, and his voice carried across the restaurant. You'll regret this. I watched him walk out, leaving his untouched lunch and the check. The waiter approached cautiously, and I paid for both meals, leaving a $20 tip. Driving home, I turned the question over in my mind. Did Derek truly believe $50,000 was generous, or had my sons become so accustomed to underestimating me that genuine condescension had replaced strategy? Had they convinced themselves I was incompetent, or were they performing a script Eleanor had predicted with geological precision? I didn't know which answer was worse. Before I tell you what happened that night with Kezia, are you still with me? Comment A or B and add one short reason. A equals Arthur should tell Kezia everything now, or B equals Arthur should protect her by staying silent. A quick note. The next part includes some fictionalized details added to deepen the emotional impact. What matters is the lesson behind it. Kezia arrived at the gas station at 9 p.m., her Camry pulling up to pump 2 with headlights cutting through November darkness. She looked exhausted, hair pulled back, no makeup, the face of someone who'd stopped sleeping well weeks ago. Dad! She hugged me, and I felt her trembling. Can we talk inside? We sat in the small office, the space Eleanor had organized 50 years ago, with filing cabinets and a desk lamp that still worked. Kezia held her hands in her lap, fingers knotted together. Derek and Vivian hired a psychiatrist, she said quietly, for a competency evaluation. They're scheduling it for next week. I can't stay quiet anymore. I reached across the desk and took her hand. Her fingers were cold. You don't need to apologize, I said. But I've been weak. I've watched them plan this, and I haven't. Kezia. I squeezed her hand gently. One thing. Tomorrow don't go to the work site. She looked up confused. What? Just trust your father. I don't understand. You will, but tomorrow stay away, please. She searched my face for explanation, and I saw Eleanor's eyes looking back at me, the same gray-blue, the same intelligence, the same capacity for loyalty that Derek and Desmond had inherited only in fragments. Okay, she whispered. After she left, I sat alone in the office until 2 a.m. Eleanor's 1971 stratigraphic map spread across the desk under the lamp. Her handwriting covered the margins, coordinates, depth, calculations, mineral composition notes written with surgical precision. She'd designed perfect revenge, but she'd never told me how to protect the innocent casualties standing too close to the blast radius. The truth crystallized in that moment. I'd warned Kezia to avoid the work site, not to protect my plan, but to spare her from witnessing the exact moment Derek and Desmond's world collapsed when the excavators hit lithium. Justice was geological certainty. Compassion was choosing what she wouldn't have to see. I folded Eleanor's map and locked it in the desk drawer. Tomorrow, the excavators would hit lithium at approximately 2 p.m. 72 hours had become 18. Raymond's 24-hour countdown would start. Nova, Tur would move, and Derek would learn what $2,400 really bought. The question I couldn't answer at 2 a.m., would Kezia forgive me for saving her, or hate me for destroying her brothers? I turned off the desk lamp and sat in darkness, listening to the desert wind against the gas station walls, waiting for the dawn that would bring the climax Eleanor had engineered from beyond the grave. I woke at 5 a.m. on November 20th, 2022, and knew before my feet touched the floor that today Eleanor's 40-year wait would end. The question from 2 a.m., whether Kezia would forgive me, hadn't been answered, but dawn had arrived anyway, indifferent to moral complexity, and geology operated on schedules that didn't accommodate doubt. I brewed coffee in the small kitchen, the same percolator Eleanor had used for 50 years, and carried the mug to the gas station office window. Across the highway, Derek's excavation site sat quiet in pre-dawn darkness. The excavator parked beside the foundation pit, like a sleeping predator, its bucket still crusted with pale clay from the previous day's work. At 7:23 a.m., Griffin called. We hit something at 183 meters, he said, voice carefully neutral. White-gray soil, different texture, chemical smell, brine, maybe mineral salts. Derek's asking questions I can't answer yet. I pressed the phone against my ear pulse, steady. What does it look like? Clay consistency but lighter, almost chalky. The excavator operator stopped, immediately said, The bucket came up looking wrong. Griffin paused. I'm recommending laboratory analysis. Recommended. Need to stop all excavation immediately. Derek's not happy, but this is standard protocol for unusual subsurface findings. Through the window, I could see trucks gathering at the worksite, small figures moving around the excavator. Derek's white pickup was parked at the edge of the pit. Keep me informed, I said. Griffin called again at 3 p.m. Grade A lithium carbonate. He said quietly, the professional neutrality gone. Exactly where the 1971 map said it would be. Arthur, this is... I know what it is. Derek doesn't. Not yet. He thinks it's a construction delay. I looked at Eleanor's photograph on the desk, her face young and determined in the frame I'd kept for 40 years. She'd calculated this moment with stratigraphic precision depth, composition, discovery timeline. The only variable she couldn't control was whether I'd have the courage to execute her plan when the moment arrived. Between Griffin's morning call and afternoon confirmation, I sat motionless at the gas station counter for 3 hours, coffee going cold in my hand, watching Derek's trucks idle at the halted worksite. 40 years of Eleanor's patience had compressed into 183 meters of Nevada geology. Every meter the excavator descended had brought my sons closer to the lithium that would bury them, and they'd paid for the excavation themselves. At 6 p.m., I locked the gas station door and returned to the office. The list Eleanor had left in the sealed envelope written in April 2022, 2 weeks before her death, lay on the desk beside her photograph. 3 names, 3 phone numbers, instructions in her precise handwriting. I picked up the phone and dialed Raymond Cole first. It's confirmed, I said. Grade A lithium carbonate at 183 meters. I'm filing the mineral estate violation complaint now. Raymond's voice carried the sharp efficiency of a lawyer executing a plan months in preparation. Derek's excavation crew extracted material from your mineral estate without authorization. That's illegal mining under Nevada revised statutes. The Division of Minerals will issue an immediate cease and desist. The entry twist landed with legal precision. Derek had ordered the excavation to build his luxury resort. But because Arthur owned the subsurface rights separately, every bucket of soil the Caterpillar lifted was legally classified as mining without permit. Derek's own construction crew had just performed illegal extraction on his father's mineral property. How long until he knows? I asked. NDMN will serve notice tomorrow morning. Once they identify lithium in the extracted material, the complaint becomes a formal mining violation. Derek's development permit doesn't authorize mineral extraction, only surface construction. I thanked Raymond and dialed the second number. The Novaterre representative answered on the first ring. We had been communicating through Raymond for 3 weeks, but this was our first direct conversation. Mr. Calloway, I understand congratulations are in order. Grade A lithium carbonate confirmed at 183 meters, I said. Ready to discuss terms. We can have acquisition paperwork ready in 48 hours. Our preliminary offer stands at $180 million for the mineral rights plus royalty percentage on extracted lithium carbonate. Does that timeline work? I thought of Raymond's warning, 24 hours after discovery becomes public record before Vivienne's lawyers could freeze the transaction. We had margin. It works. The third call was the one Eleanor had marked urgent in her notes. I dialed Alan Herschel's direct line at the Nevada Division of Minerals. The phone rang twice before a voice I hadn't heard in 25 years answered. Herschel. Alan, this is Arthur Calloway. Silence then. Arthur Jesus. It's been what? 25 years. Since the USGS survey. Lawansboyend and Bitspiaspin. 26. I need a favor. The exit twist revealed itself in that moment. Arthur Calloway, the foolish old man Derek had mocked for spending 75 years pumping gas, was calling a senior Nevada Division of Minerals inspector, who remembered him as the USGS, senior geological engineer who'd supervised subsurface surveys across 6 western states. The institutional relationships Derek never knew existed. There's an irregularity at an excavation site in Elko County, I said. Mineral discovery on property with separated subsurface rights. The surface owner may not understand the legal implications. You need an inspection. Tomorrow morning, if possible. Alan was quiet for a moment. Arthur, if this is what I think it is, it is. I'll be there at 8 a.m. Hanging up from the final call, I thought of stratigraphic layers again my sons had excavated down, through what they believed was worthless sediment, never realizing each meter brought them closer to the lithium that would bury them. They'd dug their own grave with a Caterpillar 336, and I'd watched from across the highway, saying nothing. I looked at Eleanor's photograph one last time before turning off the desk lamp. "Tomorrow will be a different day," I said to the empty office. At midnight, I locked the gas station Eleanor's 1971 geological map, still spread on the desk beside her photograph. Tomorrow morning, Alan Herschel would arrive for urgent inspection. Raymond's mineral rights complaint would hit Derek's development company, and Novatur would begin formal acquisition negotiations. Derek still thought the white-gray soil was a construction delay. He had no idea his world had ended at 7:23 a.m. Griffin's call came at 10 a.m. NDMN, just sealed the entire worksite. I set down my coffee, the mug still warm against my palm. Derek's construction delay had just become something else entirely. "Tell me exactly what happened," I said. Inspector arrived at 8:30. Alan Herschel, senior examiner from the Division of Minerals, came with an emergency stop work order, unauthorized extraction from a separately held mineral estate. Griffin's voice carried the careful tone of a geologist reporting facts he knew would detonate. All machinery sealed, $10,000 daily fine until the ownership dispute is resolved. Through the gas station window, I could see distant figures gathering at the worksite, tiny against the excavation pit that had become Derek's legal grave. Derek's reaction? It screamed that we're only doing construction. The inspector explained that when construction excavation hits mineral-bearing strata belonging to another party's subsurface rights, Nevada law classifies it as unauthorized extraction, regardless of surface owner intent. Griffin paused. Desmond tried arguing. Herschel showed them the mineral rights filing, separate ownership, recorded May 2022, Nevada Mineral Estate Confidential Beneficial Interest Structure. And then, worksite completely frozen, orange tags on every piece of equipment. Herschel left copies of the complaint and the statute. Derek's making calls now, probably to Vivienne. I thanked Griffin and hung up. The entry twist had sprung with bureaucratic precision. Derek's luxury resort project had become an illegal mining operation the moment the Caterpillar's bucket lifted lithium-bearing clay at 183 meters. Nevada law didn't distinguish intent when you extracted minerals owned by someone else's subsurface estate. Every shovelful after discovery was a $10,000 per day violation, and Derek had excavated for 36 hours before the inspector arrived. The mathematics were elegant. Eleanor would have appreciated the symmetry. After Griffin's call, I stood at the gas station window, watching November wind push tumbleweeds across the empty highway. 40 years ago, Eleanor had predicted this exact morning, down to the statute number, and I'd thought she was being paranoid about family. She'd mapped the lithium deposit in 1971, waited 20 years to tell me then, designed legal mechanisms that would trigger automatically when Derek's greed intersected with geological certainty. She hadn't been paranoid. She'd been precise. The house phone rang at 11 a.m. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Dad?" Derek's voice sounded tight, controlled, in a way that revealed how close to breaking he was. "I need to talk to you." "I'm at the station." "I know. I'll be there in an hour." He arrived at noon, pulling into the gas station in his black SUV, with the careful movements of a man who no longer trusted the ground beneath him. No Vivienne, no Desmond, just Derek, alone, walking toward the office with an unfamiliar uncertainty in his stride. The door opened with the same bell chime it had made for 50 years. Derek stood in the doorway, and I saw my son clearly for the first time since Eleanor's funeral. A man in his 40s who'd built an identity on being smarter than his father, now facing the possibility that every assumption had been wrong. "Sit down," I said. He sat in the old chair across from my desk, the same chair where he'd lounged 3 months ago, while mocking the gas station property as worthless. Then he'd sprawled with entitled confidence. Now, he gripped the armrests like a man realizing the ground beneath him wasn't solid, had never been solid. "Dad," his voice was careful, "whose mineral rights are they talking about?" I set down the newspaper I'd been reading, the Elko Daily Free Press, same paper Eleanor had read every morning for 40 years, and met my son's eyes directly for the first time since the family meeting in July. "The Desert Geological Holdings, LLC, I said. Derek stared at me. "Whose company?" "Mine." The silence that followed had weight. I watched Derek's face cycle through calculations, when the LLC was registered, when the mineral rights were purchased, how long I'd known about the lithium deposit beneath the property he'd tried to steal. "You bought the mineral rights?" he said slowly. "In May, after Mom died. October 21st, recorded with the county recorder, October 23rd, under confidential beneficial ownership provisions. For how much?" I had repeated this number across multiple tasks already, so I varied the phrasing. The transaction was $2,400 for 800 acres of subsurface estate at $3 per acre. Derek's hands tightened on the chair arms. "And the lithium, premium lithium carbonate confirmed at 183 meters. Preliminary estimates suggest significant commercial viability." The exit twist manifested in Derek's posture. He sat alone in his father's office for the first time in his adult life, without Vivian's legal strategy, or Desmond's backup, forced to face the man he'd publicly humiliated, with genuine terror spreading across his features. Because somewhere in his mind, a memory was surfacing, something about loan documents, about pages he'd signed without reading. "And how did you know?" His voice had gone quiet. "About the lithium? Your mother mapped it in 1971, USGS survey work. She kept the data." Derek looked at me, and I saw the exact moment comprehension clicked into place. Not about the lithium, about something else, something worse. "The loan," he whispered, "the 150,000. I said nothing. "Dad." Derek's face had gone white. "Do you remember page 47? I looked at my son, truly looked at Derek for the first time since Eleanor's funeral, and saw fear that went deeper than the NDMN work stoppage, deeper than the mineral rights dispute. He'd remembered the conversion clause buried in 149 pages of loan documents he'd signed without reading in August. "The loan converts to equity if—" Derek couldn't finish the sentence. I waited, saying nothing, while my son sat across from me, realizing that Eleanor's revenge had layers he hadn't begun to comprehend. Outside, the November wind rattled the gas station windows, and the excavation pit sat frozen under orange NDMN tags, accumulating $10,000 in fines with every passing day. Vivian's car pulled up 30 minutes later, and Raymond was already waiting inside, with the loan documents spread across my desk. Derek hadn't moved from his chair. He sat frozen in the same position, staring at nothing, while the November afternoon light filtered through the gas station windows and cast shadows across loan paperwork that would destroy his life. Vivian entered without knocking. She never knocked, wearing the tailored business suit of a corporate attorney accustomed to controlling rooms. But when she saw Raymond sitting calmly beside me, laptop open, her stride faltered. "Derek called me," she said, eyes moving between her husband and the documents. "What's this about page 47? Sit down," Raymond said, gesturing to the empty chair. 4 people sat in the small gas station office under yellow fluorescent light that had illuminated Eleanor's bookkeeping for 40 years. Myself, Derek, Vivian, Raymond. The same configuration as the family meeting in July, but the power structure inverted. Vivian opened her laptop with practiced efficiency, pulled up the digital loan file Derek had signed in August, and scrolled to page 47, the appendix section. The clause buried beneath 148 pages of standard commercial lending language. She read it silently, first face, unchanging, then aloud, with the precise diction of someone trained to parse contract language. Loan converts to 51% voting shares in borrower's primary business entity. If borrower materially violates, interferes with, or damages lender's separately held mineral rights, surface rights, or other property interests as determined by state regulatory authority or court of competent jurisdiction. The office went silent, except for the hum of the fluorescent light. Vivian scrolled up slightly, and I watched her face change when she saw the red-bordered text box positioned directly above her own digital signature. "I have read, understood, and agree to Section 47 conversion provisions independently. I acknowledge receipt of separate counsel advisement opportunity." Derek leaned forward to read the screen. Once, twice, 3 times, in complete silence. The entry twist crystallized in Vivian's expression. She was a corporate lawyer who'd orchestrated every legal attack against me, who'd drafted competency petitions and researched mineral rights law and structured Derek's development company. and she had personally signed the conversion clause with a witness statement declaring she independently read and understood Section 47, making her professional expertise the instrument of her own defeat. That the NDMN violation, Vivian said slowly, triggered material interference. Unauthorized extraction from my mineral estate. Raymond confirmed. State regulatory determination, exactly as specified in the clause. Vivian closed the laptop with careful precision. How long have you been planning this? I met her eyes directly. Since the day you came with the first folder. The exit twist landed without ceremony. I hadn't planned Eleanor's revenge from her deathbed in April, or from the gas station purchase in 1952, or even from the 1971 Geological Survey. I'd planned it from October 2022, from the exact moment Vivian walked into my dining room, carrying competency evaluation folders and a lawyer's certainty that I wouldn't fight back. Every subsequent move had been calculated response to that single instant of family betrayal. The mineral rights purchase in May, the loan offer in August, the conversion clause Vivian had signed, hiring Griffin, calling Alan Herschel, all of it traceable to one afternoon when my daughter-in-law decided I was incompetent. Eleanor had given me the tools. Vivian had given me the motivation. You can't do this, Derek said, voice hoarse. We'll fight it. The clause is enforceable. Raymond interrupted gently. I drafted it specifically to survive legal challenge. 3 separate attorneys reviewed it before Arthur offered the loan. Vivian's independent acknowledgement above her signature eliminates any claim of concealment or coercion. Vivian and Derek left, without another word, walking to the Audi in silence while the worksite sat frozen under NDMN orange tags accumulating fines that no longer mattered because Derek didn't own his company anymore. After they left, I sat alone in the gas station office under yellow light in the same chair where Eleanor used to do bookkeeping 40 years ago. She'd predicted this exact scene down to which child would sign the trap, and I'd thought she was being cruel instead of precise. The next morning, I wore the only suit I'd kept the suit from signing our first house deed with Eleanor in 1985, navy blue and slightly loose now, after months of Eleanor's illness and my own grief. Raymond's law office occupied the second floor of a brick building, downtown, decorated with Nevada state maps and mining law certificates that reminded me of Eleanor's geological surveys. 2 Novaterre Energy representatives sat across the conference table, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and a younger man carrying a leather portfolio. Mr. Calloway. The woman extended her hand. We're pleased to formalize this agreement. The contract was surprisingly brief for a transaction of this magnitude. 12 pages of clear language that Raymond had already reviewed twice. $180 million upfront licensing fee. The woman said, walking through terms I'd memorized. 8% royalty on all lithium carbonate production over a 25-year term. Exclusive extraction rights to the full 800 acres of subsurface estate. The younger man turned to a flagged page. Special Provision Novaterre operations coordinate directly with Desert Geological Holdings, LLC, as mineral rights holder. Your company maintains ownership. We license extraction. I nodded, understanding Eleanor's final precision. She hadn't wanted me to sell the lithium. She'd wanted me to own it. Raymond slid the signature page across the polished table. I reached into my jacket pocket and withdrew Eleanor's fountain pen. The pen from her desk drawer, the pen she'd used to write stratigraphic coordinates in hospice, the pen that had signed our first house deed in 1985. I held it above the signature line and understood that revenge wasn't fire consuming everything in rage. It was sediment 40 years of pressure becoming one signature geological certainty compressed into legal mechanism. I signed Arthur Calloway in Eleanor's dark blue ink. The pen felt warm against my fingers. Laner, I thought, looking at my signature beside the notary's seal. We did it. I took the first long, deep breath I'd managed in months. Driving home from Raymond's office with the contract in a manila envelope on the passenger seat, my phone rang. The display showed Desmond. I pulled over and answered. Dad? His voice was different, small, uncertain nothing, like the swagger from October when he'd mocked me at the worksite. We need to talk about the loan. I was sitting at the gas station counter when my phone vibrated. Kezia, not Desmond this time, her voice shaky in a way I'd never heard before. Desmond's earlier call had lasted 30 seconds. He'd said, we need to talk about the loan, and I'd said, I know. Then silence followed by the click of disconnection. He hadn't been ready to face what page 47 meant. Not yet. But Kezia was calling from somewhere with wind noise and distant machinery. "Father," her voice caught on the word. "I'm at the worksite, in my car. I needed to tell you what just happened." I waited, phone pressed against my ear, watching afternoon light stretch shadows across the gas station pumps. "Desmond spent 3 hours calling every lawyer in Elko and Reno," Kezia said. "Trying to break the conversion clause. Page 47. No one would take the case. They all said it's too legally tight with Vivienne's separate acknowledgement." One attorney laughed, told Desmond any first-year law student could see the clause was bulletproof. Through the phone, I heard a car door slam, then Desmond's voice in the distance, muffled but sharp. "He came to the worksite 20 minutes ago," Kezia continued. "Derek was already here, standing by the excavator with the orange NDMN tags. Desmond walked straight up to him and..." She paused. "Father," he turned on Derek, started screaming. "Why didn't you read it carefully? Why didn't you check the fine print before signing?" What did Derek say?" "Nothing, just stood there silent while Desmond kept yelling. I heard the distant sound of metal impacting metal." "He just punched the excavator cabin," Kezia said, voice tight. "The sealed one. He's screaming." She held the phone toward the noise, and I heard Desmond's voice carrying across the worksite, raw with rage, and something that sounded like breaking. "That old-fashioned geological old man played us." The entry twist landed with perfect irony. Desmond had mocked me with that exact phrase in October, standing at this same worksite laughing about geological surveys being obsolete. Now he was using it again, while punching sealed machinery, finally understanding that the geology expertise he'd dismissed as outdated had been the weapon that destroyed him. "Kezia," I said quietly, "are you safe?" "I'm in my car. I didn't get out. Her voice cracked. "Father, can I come see you? I'm at the gas station, waiting for you." After Kezia's call ended, I sat in gas station silence and brewed tea, Eleanor's chamomile blend, from the cupboard she'd stocked 40 years ago, the tin still half full, because I'd never learned to drink it the way she had. Steam rose from 2 cups, and I understood the difference between revenge that destroys everyone and revenge that saves the salvageable. Eleanor had designed total justice, but she'd also loved Kezia in ways she'd stopped loving Derek after the competency threat. The question was which instruction to follow. Kezia arrived at 7 p.m., pulling her Camry into the same pump where she'd stopped 3 months ago to warn me about Derek's resort conspiracy. She looked smaller now. He arrived at noon, pulling exhausted in a way that aged her well beyond her 28 years, into the gas station in his black SUV, with the careful movements of a man who no longer trusted the ground beneath him. No Vivienne, no Desmond. Just Derek alone, walking toward the office with an unfamiliar uncertainty in his stride. We sat across from each other in the office. I slid 1 cup of chamomile tea toward her. "I brewed it the way your mother did," I said. "Never could get the timing right, but it's close." Kezia wrapped both hands around the warm cup, and I saw Eleanor's gesture repeated in her daughter's fingers. "I need to say something directly," I began. "I know you were dragged into this, not the mastermind, but you stayed silent too long when your father needed someone to speak up." Kezia nodded without arguing, without the defensive explanations I'd expected. Just acceptance. I opened the desk drawer and withdrew the document Raymond had prepared that morning, separate from the Novaterra contract, separate from the conversion clause executions, a single page offering terms I'd spent the entire drive home from Raymond's office deciding. "This offers you 5% equity in Desert Geological Holdings, LLC, I said, sliding the paper across Eleanor's old desk. "Contingent on 2 conditions: you withdraw completely from Derek's development company, and you sign a binding promise of no legal action against me or my estate regarding the mineral rights, the loans, or any related transactions." Kezia read the document slowly, then looked up with Eleanor's gray-blue eyes. "Why give me anything?" "Because your mother would have wanted me to." The exit twist crystallized in that answer. I wasn't offering Kezia equity as forgiveness, or even as my own choice. I was executing Eleanor's proxy decision, following instructions she'd never written, but had communicated through 40 years of marriage. Eleanor had designed justice for Derek Desmond and Vivienne total destruction through their own greed. But she'd also designed mercy for Kezia, separating the daughter who'd been weak from the sons who'd been cruel. Kezia's signature on the equity contract looked nothing like Vivienne's on page 47. No red-bordered acknowledgement box, no legal trap waiting to spring, no conversion clause buried in appendices. Just a father separating his daughter from brothers who'd chosen destruction over family, saving what could be saved from the blast radius. She stood and I stood, and Kezia hugged me for the first time in years. I felt her shoulders shake once, then steady. She mentioned before leaving that Finn had drawn a picture of a gas station in school that week and told his teacher his grandfather owned it. His teacher had asked why. He'd said, "Because Grandpa knows what's underground." I kept that detail the way you keep certain geological samples small, unremarkable to anyone else, irreplaceable to you. And tomorrow, I said, hand on her shoulder, Derek and Vivian will come here. Kezia nodded against my chest, understanding that reconciliation with her didn't mean reconciliation with everyone. After she left, I locked the gas station and stood in Nevada darkness, looking at the sealed work site half a mile away. Yellow NDMN violation tape glowed under floodlights marking boundaries. Derek couldn't cross fines accumulating at $10,000 per day on machinery that had dug the grave of his own empire. Tomorrow, Derek and Vivienne would come. Tomorrow, I would have to decide if 51% equity meant total destruction, or something Eleanor had never told me how to navigate winning without annihilating my own children. They arrived at 9 a.m. on November 23rd, 2 days before Thanksgiving, 3 people in one car walking toward the gas station with none of the confidence they had carried 3 months ago. I'd spent the night deciding, not whether to destroy them, Eleanor's plan had already accomplished that, but whether to leave them in the ruins or build something from the wreckage that wouldn't require annihilating my own children. The answer had come at dawn, watching November light spread across the valley, permanent control, not permanent destruction. Raymond sat beside me in the office briefcase closed on the desk, waiting. Derek entered first, then Vivienne, then Desmond. They stood in the small space under fluorescent light, and I saw exhaustion in postures that had carried arrogance 3 months ago during the family meeting. Derek's shoulders slumped. Vivienne's tailored suit looked slept in. Desmond's hands trembled slightly at his sides. Nobody sat until I gestured to the chairs. Silence filled the office, not the comfortable silence of family, but the terrible quiet of people who'd gambled everything and lost. Derek looked at his hands. Vivienne stared at the floor. Desmond's jaw worked like he was trying to form words that wouldn't come. Finally, Derek spoke, voice rough. Machinery sealed. 2.3 million invested equipment purchases, contractor deposits, engineering studies, all frozen under NDMN violation orders. He paused, swallowing. Contractors are demanding payment. Banks reviewing our credit lines because the project stalled. Legal firms won't touch appeals because page 47 is enforceable. Vivienne finished quietly. Her voice carried none of the legal authority I'd heard in July. Just fact. The conversion clause means you control 51% voting rights, Derek continued. Everything we built, the development company, the resort, plans the financing structure. His voice broke on the next word. Dad, we need help. The entry twist landed in that single-syllable Derek, who'd orchestrated the family meeting to declare me incompetent, who'd mocked my geological work as obsolete, who'd tried to steal Eleanor's property, was calling me Dad. Not Arthur, not the old man, not any of the dismissive variations I'd heard for years. The childhood address of someone with no power left. I let the silence extend another 30 seconds, then reached for Eleanor's ceramic teapot and poured a cup. The same pot she'd used for 40 years, chipped at the spout, but still functional. I pushed the cup across the desk toward Derek. Sit down, I said. Listen to me. Derek sat immediately, and I understood the power reversal was complete. I'd given him an order, the first direct command I'd issued to my son in his adult life, and he'd obeyed without hesitation. Between Derek's plea and what came next, I held Eleanor's teapot, and understood this moment wasn't revenge anymore. It was archaeology excavating what remained of family from the sediment of betrayal, deciding which fragments were worth preserving and which had to stay buried. Raymond opened his briefcase and withdrew 3 copies of a contract I'd spent yesterday afternoon reviewing with him. 12 pages, clear language, no hidden clauses, no traps, just permanent institutional hierarchy. Restructuring agreement. Raymond said, distributing copies. Desert Geological Holdings, LLC, retains 70% equity in Derek's development company, plus the 51% voting rights established by the loan conversion clause. Derek, Desmond, and Vivienne retained 30% equity collectively. Vivienne picked up her copy, and I watched her corporate lawyer instincts engage despite exhaustion. She began reading with the careful attention of someone searching for escape routes. "You're permitted to continue operating the resort development," Raymond continued. "However, every business decision involving expenditure over $10,000 requires Arthur's written approval. All Novaterra lithium royalty payments flow to Desert Geological Holdings. Arthur will allocate 30% of those royalties to your equity stake for debt repayment and operational funding." "How long?" Desmond asked, voice tight. Raymond met his eyes. 25 years, non-terminable except by mutual written agreement of all parties. The exit twist crystallized in those terms. I wasn't offering mercy. I was establishing permanent institutional control using Novaterra's quarter-century royalty stream to keep Derek and Desmond financially dependent on the father they had tried to destroy. They'd spend the next 25 years, possibly the rest of Derek's working life, operating a business I controlled, seeking my approval for every significant decision, living on allowances I allocated from lithium they had tried to steal. Eleanor had designed their destruction. I was designing their rehabilitation. The difference was architectural, not moral. Vivienne finished reading and set down the contract. "This is legally sound," she said quietly. "No loopholes." She'd searched for weaknesses she could exploit later, and found none. Raymond had drafted it with the same precision he'd used for page 47. "Where do we sign?" Derek asked. Raymond indicated the signature pages. Desmond grabbed the pen, first hand shaking so badly the signature came out illegible. I watched him sign, and remembered October, standing at the worksite while Desmond laughed with the excavator crew, calling me a dinosaur who didn't understand modern development, mocking the valley as worthless. The valley Desmond had called worthless was feeding him now. The dinosaur he'd dismissed held the pen that controlled his future. Watching Desmond's trembling signature, I thought of stratigraphic pressure again. My sons had drilled down thinking they'd find water, hit lithium instead, and now the caprock they'd fractured was their own financial independence permanently collapsed under geological forces they hadn't understood until the excavator bucket lifted white-gray clay at 183 meters. Derek signed next, then Vivienne, her corporate lawyer, signature precise despite everything. I signed last using Eleanor's fountain pen. Raymond collected the contracts, distributing copies. "Effective immediately. I'll file with the Nevada Secretary of State this afternoon." Derek and Desmond stood moving toward the door, with the mechanical motion of defeated men. They walked to the car without speaking, gravel crunching under their shoes. But Vivienne stayed behind. She stood in the gas station doorway, briefcase in hand, looking at me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Not anger, not calculation, but something closer to recognition. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Just the two of us." Derek and Desmond stepped outside to the parking lot, and Vivienne didn't follow. She stayed seated, and so did I. Raymond had gathered his briefcase and left, quietly understanding this conversation required privacy. The gas station office felt smaller, with just two people, myself and the woman who'd orchestrated my competency evaluation, who'd researched mineral rights law to exploit loopholes, who'd signed page 47 without reading the appendix carefully enough. Vivienne spoke first. "You already knew I wouldn't read the appendix carefully," she said. Not a question, a statement of fact. I nodded. "Because I'm good at commercial law. Corporate structures, financing agreements, development permits." She paused. "But I know nothing about Nevada mineral law, about stratigraphic surveys or subsurface estates or NRS, Chapter 517 confidential ownership provisions." You underestimated an old geological engineer," I said. Vivienne looked at me directly for the first time since the family meeting in July. What was my mistake specifically? I considered the question, recognizing it wasn't rhetorical. She genuinely wanted to understand where her strategy had failed. "You thought experience could be skipped," I said. "Thought age was weakness instead of accumulated knowledge. 40 years reading soil composition, studying mineral deposits, understanding how Nevada law separates surface rights from subsurface estates. That's something no business school teaches. You saw a 65-year-old man pumping gas and assumed incompetence. Never considered that geological engineering was a career before it was a hobby." Vivienne absorbed this in silence, then stood. She walked to the door, briefcase in hand, and stopped with her back to me. "And this contract," she said quietly, is fairer than what we intended to do to you. The entry twist landed without ceremony. Vivian was acknowledging that the restructuring agreement, 70% equity and permanent approval authority, was more merciful than the competency hearing and asset seizure she'd orchestrated. The corporate lawyer, recognizing that the incompetent old man had shown more mercy and victory than she would have, revealing her understanding that expertise and ethics weren't the same thing. She left without waiting for my response. After Vivian's car pulled away, I sat in gas station in silence, holding Eleanor's photograph, the one I'd kept on the desk for 40 years, her face young and determined in a frame that had survived decades of desert dust. She'd predicted every move our children would make, designed perfect revenge down to statute numbers and conversion clauses, and the exact depth where excavators would hit lithium. But she'd never told me the hardest part wasn't winning. It was deciding what to do with victory when family was the casualty. I set the photograph back on the desk and looked out the window at the valley Eleanor had loved. 5 days later, Thanksgiving morning arrived with cold clarity and cloudless sky. Estelle's car pulled up at 10 a.m., and she stepped out carrying a large pot wrapped in a kitchen towel, steam escaping from the edges. Kezia followed with a box of pies, pumpkin and apple, the same combination Eleanor had made every Thanksgiving for 40 years. "We're not letting you eat alone today," Estelle said, setting the pot on the small folding table in the office. 3 people ate Thanksgiving at a gas station in Elko County, Nevada. Turkey Estelle had cooked in her apartment kitchen, cornbread, green beans with almonds. The comfortable silence of family that had survived pressure and emerged compressed into something stronger. Kezia told stories between Bite's childhood, Thanksgivings when Eleanor was alive, the year she'd made 3 pies and I'd eaten half of one before dinner. Started the time Derek had tried to deep fry a turkey in the driveway and nearly burned down the garage. I listened and Estelle smiled, and the gas station office filled with voices for the first time since Eleanor's illness had turned our home silent. It was the first meal I hadn't eaten alone in 6 months. After we'd cleared the plates paper because the gas station had no proper dishes, Estelle poured coffee from the percolator and asked the question I'd been waiting for. "What now, Arthur?" I looked out the window toward the valley. Eleanor's valley, my valley now with lithium deposits worth billions, and a sealed work site accumulating fines and children, working under permanent supervision, and a restructuring contract that would govern my family's business for the next quarter century. I thought of the $10 property purchase in October 2022, the stratigraphic map Eleanor had drawn in 1971, 40 years of marriage and geology and quiet accumulation of knowledge that corporate lawyers mistook for incompetence. The exit twist crystallized in my answer. Now Build wasn't about the gas station or the lithium royalties, or even Desert Geological Holdings, LLC. It was about reconstructing family with Estelle and Kezia using the same geological patience Eleanor had taught me over 40 years of marriage. Understanding that 40 years of revenge would require 40 years of rebuilding what pressure had compressed. Now Build, I said. Watching Kezia and Estelle clear Thanksgiving dishes from the folding table, I understood sediment geology. One final time my family hadn't dissolved under the weight of betrayal and revenge. It had just compressed under pressure into something denser, stronger, like lithium carbonate crystallizing from brine over millions of years, transforming from worthless desert runoff into something valuable enough to power the future. Eleanor had taught me to read rocks. Now I was reading what remained of family, identifying which layers could bear weight and which had to be excavated and discarded. Estelle hugged me before leaving. "Eleanor would be proud," she whispered. I wasn't sure that was true. Eleanor had designed perfect revenge, not perfect reconciliation. But maybe that was the point. She'd given me the tools and trusted me to decide what to build with them. A week after Thanksgiving, a letter arrived at the gas station, forwarded from Eleanor's hospice facility in Reno. The envelope was marked, "To be delivered, December 1st, 2022, if mineral rights transferred." I opened it with Eleanor's letter opener hand steady. Inside, one sentence in her familiar handwriting. "Arthur, if you're reading this, you already know lithium wasn't the real deposit. Love was." Below that, coordinates I didn't recognize: 40.9847 degrees, north 115.76, 28 degrees west, and a date June 15th, 2024. 2 years, they say 2 years is enough for everything to change. I held Eleanor's letter in my hands that December morning in 2022, reading the coordinates and the date 18 months in the future, and I didn't understand. But I'd learned to trust Eleanor's timing even when it made no sense, so I tucked the letter into the desk drawer with her 1971 geological map and waited. Now it was November 2024 and I understood. The gas station had become the Callaway Geological Heritage Center. Same building, same fluorescent lights. But the pumps outside had been replaced with interpretive displays explaining stratigraphic surveys and Nevada mineral law and the history of lithium extraction in Elko County. Visitors came weekly: geology students, mining engineers, occasionally corporate attorneys researching subsurface estate law. I sat in the office where I'd once slept on a folding chair, reading the latest quarterly report from Novaterra. The numbers were staggering in their consistency: royalty payments arriving like geological clockwork, 8% of lithium carbonate production from 800 acres of desert that had looked worthless to everyone except Eleanor. The Elko Desert Oasis Resort had opened 6 months ago. Derek and Desmond operated it under the restructuring agreement, 30% revenue allocation, paying down their bank debts, every decision over $10,000 requiring my written signature. They sent monthly reports that were professional, detailed, and completely devoid of the condescension I'd endured for years. On the wall behind my desk, Eleanor's 1971 stratigraphic map hung in a conservation frame, her handwritten coordinates and depth calculations preserved under museum glass. Below it, a small handwritten note I'd added, "For Eleanor who knew it all beforehand." 2 years was enough for me to not recognize this valley anymore, in the best sense. That afternoon, I drove to the resort to sign quarterly operational documents. The building rose from the same excavation pit that had been Derek's grave and his resurrection: 3 stories of southwestern architecture, underground spa complex with geothermal systems, guest rooms designed for tourists who paid premium rates to sleep above lithium deposits they'd never see. I parked and walked through the lobby, briefcase in hand. Then I stopped. Derek stood at the front desk, dressed plainly in the resort's staff uniform. No Rolex, no bespoke suit, no vanity plate Audi in the parking lot. He was guiding a couple to their room with professional courtesy, his demeanor tired but competent. The transformation was complete, from entitled son demanding his father's competency hearing to employee in a business he no longer controlled. Driving from the Heritage Center to the resort, I'd passed the sealed excavation site, now Novaterra's active lithium extraction facility, industrial lights glowing 24 hours a day, machinery operating in shifts. I'd remembered standing there 2 years ago, watching Derek's confusion when white-gray soil appeared at 183 meters, the exact moment Eleanor's 40-year patience had crystallized into victory that felt like vindication and loss compressed into the same instant. Derek saw me. Our eyes met for 1 second. He nodded slightly. Not submission, just acknowledgement. I nodded back. No words exchanged, none needed. The person who'd called me a burden now worked in the empire I'd built with $10 and a 50-year-old geological map. The irony was so complete it had transcended bitterness and become something closer to equilibrium. I signed the documents in the resort conference room, returned to my car, and drove to Estelle's house as the November sun set behind the Ruby Mountains. We sat on her porch that night under Nevada stars, the cold November sky crystal clear in the way only desert altitude allows. The valley spread below us, Eleanor's valley, the one she'd kept secret, the one I'd decoded now, feeding an entire family, whether they deserved it or not. "I never told you what else was in Eleanor's letter," I said quietly. Estelle turned to look at me, her face illuminated by porch light. The coordinates and the date. June 15th, 2024, those were instructions for when to open a second envelope she'd left with her attorney and where to open it. I drove to that ridge on a June morning, 40.9, 847 degrees north, 115.76, 28 degrees west. A small rise overlooking the valley, the exact spot where she'd first sketched the survey markings by hand back in 1971. I sat there alone and opened the envelope. I paused, feeling Eleanor's presence in the cold air. One line, in faint pencil written to herself more than me. "I always knew you were the smartest person in the room. I was just waiting for you to realize it yourself. Now you're sitting where I sat when I figured it out. Same valley, same rocks, same answer." Estelle said nothing. She rested her head lightly on my shoulder, and we sat in silence watching stars that had witnessed 40 years of patient geology. Sitting under Nevada stars with my sister, I understood geological time. Finally, Eleanor hadn't spent 40 years planning revenge. She'd spent 40 years depositing belief layer by layer, word by word, subtle affirmation, compressed under the pressure of a marriage where I'd always felt like the lesser geologist, the one who'd abandoned career for gas station pragmatism. Until pressure and time transformed those deposits into the only mineral that mattered, the one that survived her death and powered everything that followed. The exit twist crystallized under starlight. Eleanor's final secret wasn't another geological deposit or financial strategy. It was a personal note affirming she'd always believed I was brilliant, revealing the entire 40-year plan wasn't revenge, but her method of forcing me to recognize my own worth through defeating children who'd never seen it. She'd given me tools and trust, then stepped back to let geological certainty prove what she'd known since 1971. The valley she kept secret. I said more to the stars than Estelle. The valley I decoded. It's feeding the entire family now. She knew you would, Estelle whispered. I looked up at the Nevada sky, same stars Eleanor had watched from her hospice window. Same constellations that had covered this valley when she'd first mapped the lithium deposit. Same cosmic indifference that had witnessed 40 years of patient geology compressed into 2 years of transformation. She'd never doubted the lithium. She doubted me doubting myself. The real deposit was always belief, and it paid dividends no quarterly royalty could match. Sometimes, I said into the November darkness, true legacy isn't in land or minerals. It's in the words of the one who believed in you when you didn't believe in yourself. Estelle squeezed my hand, and under Eleanor's stars, I finally believed. And to you listening to my story, remember this. Sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones who hurt you most. For years, I let my children's mockery convince me I was just a foolish old man pumping gas. I doubted Eleanor's belief in me. I doubted my own geological knowledge. Don't make my mistake. Don't let anyone, even family, convince you that experience is worthless, that age means incompetence, or that quiet patience is weakness. The moment you start believing their version of who you are, you've already lost. This family story taught me that revenge isn't about destruction, it's about proving the truth. Eleanor spent 40 years believing I was brilliant when I couldn't see it myself. That's the real legacy, not money, but someone loving you enough to prepare you for battles you didn't know were coming. I believe God put Eleanor in my life to show me that patience isn't just about rocks, it's about faith. Sometimes justice takes decades. Sometimes the people who mock you will work for you tomorrow. Every family story has a turning point. Mine was finally believing what Eleanor always knew. If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment telling me what you think. Have you ever had to fight for respect from your own family? Share this with someone who needs to hear that patience and belief can change everything. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe to Revenge Dad. Your support means the world to me. Thank you for staying until the very end. This story contains fictionalized elements added for emotional impact, but the message about belief, patience, and true legacy is what I hope remains with you.